Imagine buying an abandoned cabin with your last $400 only to discover it holds a secret worth $30 million. That's exactly what happened to Morgan Hayes, an unemployed environmental specialist and single mother, when she took a desperate gamble on a derelict property in the Colorado mountains. Looking for shelter for herself and her 11-year-old daughter, she never expected to find a hidden tunnel leading to a gold mine, and rare metals deposit, a discovery that made her the target of greedy mining corporations, mysterious government agencies, and a secret society dating back to the previous century. Can Morgan protect this inheritance and secure her daughter's future? Or will she meet the same fate as the man who discovered this treasure 70 years ago, forced to disappear completely to protect this precious secret? Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if this incredible journey touches your heart, make sure you are subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something truly special for you. The late September sun cast long shadows across the mountain road as Morgan Hayes gripped the steering wheel of her weathered 2009 Honda CR-V. The SUV's air conditioning had given up months ago, but she barely noticed the heat. Her mind was consumed by the decision that would either save her family or become the final mistake in a series of unfortunate choices that had defined the past year of her life. Through the windshield smudged with the residue of mountain dust, she caught her first glimpse of the abandoned cabin perched on the edge of a forgotten mining claim. The structure looked even more dilapidated than the county auction photos had suggested, a small, weather-beaten wooden cabin with a sagging roof and windows that had long since surrendered their glass to Colorado's harsh seasonal cycles. At 39, Morgan never imagined herself as the owner of an abandoned mining cabin in the wilderness. Until 10 months ago, she had been a respected environmental compliance specialist for a sustainable development firm in Denver, with a steady paycheck and a comfortable apartment where she raised her 11-year-old daughter, Emma. Someone who spent her days in climate-controlled offices reviewing environmental impact statements and ensuring building projects met federal regulations. But life had a habit of dismantling carefully constructed plans with brutal efficiency. The cabin had cost exactly $400 at yesterday's Clear Creek County tax auction, the precise amount remaining in her checking account after 10 months of reduced hours, followed by an unexpected layoff when her company lost its major contracts during the economic downturn. Morgan pulled the CR-V to a stop on what had once been a gravel driveway, but was now mostly weeds and exposed dirt. The engine sputtered ominously before going silent, a worrying sign that her transportation might soon join the growing list of things she could no longer afford to maintain. Through the driver's side window, she studied the property that was now incredibly hers. The official listing from the county had been brutally honest: historic Silver Peak mining cabin, built circa 1899, abandoned 1950s. Structure requires extensive renovation. No electrical service, no plumbing, no heating system. Buyer assumes all liability for structural integrity, environmental hazards, and geological stability concerns. Sale includes cabin outbuildings and 3.5 acres of mountainous property. What the listing hadn't mentioned, what Morgan had only discovered through 3 days of obsessive research at the Denver Public Library, was the mystery surrounding why a cabin that had housed 3 generations of moderately successful miners had been suddenly abandoned in 1953, right when geological surveys suggested the Silver Peak claim might contain significant untapped deposits. The county records she'd accessed online showed conflicting information about the cabin's final years of operation. Some documents indicated it had been abandoned due to structural concerns and the declining profitability of small mining operations. Others suggested safety issues had necessitated its closure. A few references mentioned geological instabilities and restricted access zones, but the details were either missing or heavily redacted in the digitized archives. More puzzling was the ownership history. The cabin had been built in 1899 by the original claim owner, William Silverpeak, and operated continuously until 1953, when it was suddenly transferred to private ownership, specifically to one Walter Sullivan, a retired mining engineer with connections to the Bureau of Land Management. But Sullivan, according to county records, had died in a hiking accident in the Rocky Mountains in 1954, just 1 year after acquiring the cabin. The property had remained in the Sullivan estate ever since, with various heirs attempting to sell it for decades without success, until yesterday, when Morgan's desperate $400 bid had been the only offer submitted to the county tax assessor's office. Stepping out of the car, Morgan was immediately struck by the cabin's isolated beauty. Despite its dilapidated condition, the setting was breathtaking. Nestled at the edge of a dense pine forest with mountains rising dramatically behind it, the cabin commanded a view of the valley below that made her understand why someone would choose to live in such a remote location. The structure itself was surprisingly substantial. Built from thick pine logs that had been cut and prepared by skilled hands, the cabin's basic construction had withstood decades of harsh mountain winters and scorching summers. The roof showed obvious damage, with several areas where shingles had blown away, but the log walls appeared solid, their surfaces weathered to a silver-gray patina that spoke of age and resilience. The nearest neighbor was over 5 miles away, accessible only by the same deteriorating dirt road she had just traveled. The closest town, Pine Haven, was 15 miles down the mountain and consisted of little more than a general store gas station and a handful of houses clustered around what had once been a thriving mining community. Standing there in the mountain sunlight with her hair lifting slightly in the breeze, Morgan felt the full weight of her situation settling on her shoulders. 10 months ago, she had been living in a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in Denver, earning a good salary and planning a trip to Yellowstone with Emma to celebrate her daughter's academic achievements. Then the company had lost its major contracts and the layoffs had begun. As one of the more recent hires, Morgan had been among the first to go. The severance package had been decent, but the job market for environmental specialists had proven brutally competitive, and especially with so many similar professionals flooding the market simultaneously. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, please hit that subscribe button. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Denver apartment lease had expired at the end of August. Her landlord, despite their previously good relationship, had been unwilling to extend the lease given her unemployment status. Her sister in Minneapolis had offered to let them stay temporarily, but Morgan couldn't bear the thought of becoming a charity case sleeping in her niece's bedroom, while her brother-in-law made passive-aggressive comments about single motherhood and financial planning. Emma had been forced to change schools, moving to a smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. As Morgan's savings dwindled each month, brought new challenges, cutting expenses, selling possessions, applying for jobs that were increasingly below her qualifications. The final blow had come when Emma's father, who had never been consistently involved in their lives, had stopped sending the modest child support payments that had at least covered school supplies and clothes. So when Morgan had seen the cabin listing buried in the legal notices section of the Denver Post, something had clicked. 3.5 acres of mountain property with a cabin. It was insane, probably uninhabitable. Definitely the kind of decision that responsible financial advisors would classify as catastrophic, but it was also the only option that didn't involve swallowing her pride and admitting complete defeat. The county clerk who had processed her bid had looked at her with obvious concern. "Ma'am, you understand this property has no utilities, no services, and significant structural issues. You're buying it sight unseen, and the county makes no warranties about habitability or safety." "I understand," Morgan had replied, writing out a check for her last $400. "I'll take my chances." Now, standing in the mountain sunlight beside her failing SUV, with 2 suitcases and a box of personal belongings representing the sum total of her worldly possessions, she was beginning to question that confidence. The cabin looked even more daunting up close, and the isolation was almost overwhelming. Her phone showed only 1 bar of service, better than she had expected but hardly reliable. But there was something else, something she hadn't anticipated. Despite the obvious challenges and the sheer impracticality of her situation, she felt a strange sense of possibility. Maybe it was the breathtaking beauty of the mountain setting, or the solid craftsmanship of the cabin's construction, or simply the fact that she finally owned something again after months of losing everything that mattered. She walked closer to the cabin, running her hand along the rough-hewn logs of its exterior. The wood was warm from the sun, textured with the marks of axes and adzes wielded by men who had built this structure to last using materials and techniques that had withstood more than a century of mountain weather. The main entrance was through a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. It looked original to the 1899 construction. The wood was weathered but intact, protected somewhat by a small overhang that had shielded it from the worst of the mountain storms. A metal plate beside the door bore the inscription, "Silver Peak Mining Claim Established 1899. Morgan tried the door handle, not really expecting it to turn. To her surprise, the mechanism worked, though it required significant force to overcome decades of disuse. The door swung open with a protesting groan, revealing the interior of the cabin. The first thing that struck her was the smell, not the mustiness she had expected, but something else. Pine resin certainly, but also something metallic and earthy that she couldn't immediately identify. The interior was darker than she had anticipated, with most of the windows either boarded up or too grimy to admit much light. But as her eyes adjusted, she began to make out the layout of the space. The main floor appeared to be a combination living area and kitchen. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, substantial enough to heat the entire cabin, and probably still functional if she could get a chimney sweep to this remote location. A hand pump stood over a simple sink, suggesting access to a well or spring. The furniture was covered with sheets that had turned gray with age and dust, creating ghostly shapes throughout the room. But underneath the neglect, she could see evidence of quality construction and thoughtful design. The floors were wide plank pine that would be beautiful if properly restored. The walls showed craftsmanship from an era when builders took pride in every element of their work. Simple but elegant shelving lined one wall with hooks for tools and equipment, suggesting the practical needs of mining life. As darkness began to fall over the mountains, Morgan built a small fire in the stone fireplace, its warm light creating dancing shadows across the cabin's interior. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and discoveries, but tonight, in the flickering firelight of her improbable new home, she allowed herself to believe that her desperate gamble might yet pay off in ways she couldn't have imagined. Little did she know that beneath this simple cabin lay secrets that would transform her desperate 400 investment into either the salvation she sought or a danger beyond anything she could imagine. The forgotten inheritance of the Silver Peak claim was about to reveal itself, setting in motion events that had been waiting 70 years to unfold. Morgan woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's dusty windows. She had spent a restless night on the floor wrapped in her sleeping bag, the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness keeping her alert long after she'd banked the fire for the evening. Rising stiffly, she moved to one of the windows and wiped away decades of grime with her sleeve, revealing a spectacular view of the valley below, bathed in morning light. "At least the location has its perks," she murmured to herself, stretching muscles sore from the hard floor. Her first priority today was a more thorough exploration of the cabin and assessment of what she'd actually purchased. With daylight illuminating the interior, Morgan began a methodical examination of her new homeroom, by room making notes in her phone about urgent repairs and potential renovations. The main floor consisted of the living area with the large stone fireplace, a simple kitchen with a hand pump over a cast iron sink, a small bedroom, and what appeared to be a storage area at the back. The furniture, once she removed the dusty sheets, proved to be surprisingly well-preserved, solid handcrafted pieces built in the late 1800s that would sell for significant sums in Denver's antique markets. That's something, at least, she thought, running her hand over a beautifully carved oak table that would have cost thousands in a furniture store. Emma might not have to sleep on the floor after all. Moving through the cabin, Morgan noticed something peculiar about its layout. The exterior dimensions suggested more space than was apparent from the interior rooms. There seemed to be approximately 10 feet of unaccounted-for space between the back storage room and the exterior wall, an architectural anomaly that caught her attention, given her background in environmental site assessments. In the storage area, she found shelves lined with mining equipment tools and what appeared to be geological survey instruments. Everything was neatly arranged, covered in dust, but still in good condition. It looked like the workspace of someone methodical and precise, not the chaotic storage area of a cabin being hastily abandoned. On a workbench against the back wall, she found a leather-bound journal that appeared to contain notes about the property. The pages were filled with detailed observations about geological formations, mining techniques, and what looked like calculations related to ore quality and quantity. The handwriting was precise and technical, reflecting a professional background. The final entries in the journal caught Morgan's attention. Dated just weeks before Sullivan's reported death in a hiking accident, the notes reflected growing excitement about a discovery. Secondary shaft has revealed formations consistent with significant deposit potential. Initial samples exceed expectations. The primary vein appears to extend well beyond original survey estimates. The entry continued with technical details that Morgan, despite her environmental background, couldn't fully understand: references to telluride formations, quartz matrix indicators, and fault line displacement patterns suggested specialized geological knowledge. The final entry, dated just 3 days before Sullivan's reported death, was particularly intriguing. Discovery confirmed, extent exceeds all projections, security measures implemented, documentation secured, project transition protocols in place. Morgan felt a chill of excitement as she read these words. Sullivan had apparently made a significant discovery related to the mine, something valuable enough to warrant security measures and transition protocols. But whatever he had found had been lost or forgotten after his sudden death. As she placed the journal back on the workbench, her hand brushed against what appeared to be a simple wooden panel in the wall behind it. To her surprise, the panel shifted slightly, suggesting it wasn't as solidly attached as the surrounding wall. Curious, she examined the panel more closely and realized it was actually a concealed door designed to blend seamlessly with the cabin's interior walls. The mechanism was ingenious but simple, a hidden latch that released when pressure was applied to a specific point. The door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness beneath the cabin. Rough-hewn wooden steps led down into what appeared to be a cellar or underground room. Using her phone's flashlight, Morgan peered into the darkness, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The staircase was sturdily built, each step carved from a solid piece of pine and supported by robust framing. Despite their age, they felt solid underfoot as she cautiously began to descend. The passage was narrow but tall enough that she did not need to duck her head, suggesting it had been designed for regular use rather than occasional access. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a small chamber that appeared to have been used as a workshop or laboratory. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with maps, geological samples, and equipment that looked more sophisticated than the typical tools of 1950s mining operations. The walls were lined with shelves containing hundreds of rock samples, each carefully labeled and organized. A complex filing system which filled one corner with dozens of folders containing what appeared to be geological survey data, mining claims, and technical reports. "What in the world were you up to down here, Mr. Sullivan?" Morgan whispered, awed by the meticulous nature of the hidden workspace. As she was examining the contents of the underground chamber, Morgan heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle approaching on the gravel outside. Moving quickly back up the stairs, she closed the hidden door behind her, ensuring it was properly latched before making her way to the front of the cabin. Through the grimy front window, she could see a gleaming black Range Rover pull up beside her weathered Honda. The contrast between the vehicles was striking. Her decade-old SUV, with its fading paint and mountain dust, versus the pristine luxury vehicle that suggested money and authority. A man stepped out dressed in hiking boots, khaki pants, and a button-down shirt that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. He appeared to be in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to being in charge. He studied the cabin with obvious interest before approaching the front door. Morgan quickly arranged her face into a neutral expression, trying to hide both her surprise at the visitor and her excitement about the hidden chamber she'd just discovered. Taking a deep breath, she opened the front door just as the man was about to knock. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his voice carrying the polished tone of education and authority. "I didn't realize anyone was here. My name is Alexander Holt. I'm with Vertex Resources." The name meant nothing to Morgan, but the man's professional demeanor and obvious wealth suggested a corporate connection. "Morgan Hayes," she replied, automatically extending her hand. "I just purchased this property at the county auction." Holt's surprise deepened, though he quickly masked it with a professional smile. "The county auction? I wasn't aware the property was being sold. Our company has been attempting to contact the Sullivan estate for several years regarding this parcel." Morgan felt a flutter of apprehension. If a company had been trying to acquire the property, there must be something valuable about it beyond its historical significance. "The property was seized for back taxes," she explained. "According to the county clerk, there hadn't been any contact with the Sullivan heirs for decades." Holt nodded, though his expression suggested this information was unexpected. "May I ask what you plan to do with the property, Ms. Hayes? This is a rather isolated location, and the cabin appears to need significant work." The question seemed innocent enough, but Morgan sensed an underlying tension in Holt's manner. He was too interested in her plans for this to be casual curiosity. "I'm still figuring that out," she said carefully. "For now, I'm just exploring the property and assessing what I've purchased. Holt reached into his jacket and produced a business card. Vertex Resources specializes in historical mining property assessment and reclamation. If you're interested in selling, we'd be prepared to make a very generous offer significantly above what you paid at auction. Morgan took the card, noting the company logo that featured a stylized mountain peak. I've only owned this place for about 12 hours, Mr. Holt. I'm not ready to consider selling just yet. Of course, he said smoothly. But when you've had time to evaluate the challenges of maintaining a property like this, no utilities, difficult access, substantial renovation costs, you might find our offer appealing. We're prepared to pay well above market value due to the historical significance of the Silver Peak claim. Morgan's instincts, honed by years of reviewing environmental compliance documents, where the real concerns were often hidden between lines of technical language, told her that Holt wasn't being entirely forthcoming. His interest seemed too keen, his arrival too coincidental. "How did you know I was here?" she asked directly. "This property is miles from the main road, and I only purchased it yesterday." Holt hesitated just long enough for Morgan to know her question had hit a nerve. "We monitor county property records for historical mining claims," he explained. "Part of our business involves acquiring and restoring significant sites. When we saw the transfer, I decided to visit the property to assess its condition." The explanation was plausible but didn't quite ring true. County records weren't typically updated that quickly, and even if they were, Holt's immediate visit to such a remote location suggested an urgency that contradicted his casual manner. "I appreciate your interest, Mr. Holt, but as I said, I'm not considering selling at this time. The cabin has personal significance for me." The lie came easily, fueled by her growing suspicion that there was more to this property than a dilapidated cabin and an abandoned mine. Holt's expression hardened slightly before returning to its professional smoothness. "Of course, but please keep my card. Our offer will remain open, and I think you'll find it quite generous once you've had time to consider the realities of this property." As he turned to leave, he paused, looking back at Morgan with an expression that seemed almost concerned. "You should be careful here, Ms. Hayes. These old mining properties can be dangerous structural issues, abandoned equipment, even air quality concerns in enclosed spaces. Vertex would be happy to arrange a professional safety assessment at no cost to you." And the offer sounded helpful, but Morgan couldn't shake the feeling that Holt's concern was less about her safety and more about gaining access to the property. "Thank you, but I'll arrange my own inspections." She watched as Holt returned to his Range Rover, noting how he scanned the property with careful attention before driving away. His visit had left her with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that her impulsive purchase might have more value than she had initially realized. Returning to the hidden staircase, Morgan descended once again into the underground chamber, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever Sullivan had discovered, whatever had prompted his detailed notes about significant deposit potential and security measures, was likely connected to this hidden workspace and possibly to something beyond. As she studied Sullivan's maps and notes more carefully, she began to understand the potential significance of his final entries. The secondary shaft he had mentioned appeared to be a previously undocumented tunnel that branched off from the main Silver Peak mine, one that followed a different geological formation than the original miners had pursued. According to Sullivan's calculations, the secondary formation showed indicators of a much richer gold deposit than anything the Silver Peak family had extracted during their 50 years of operation. But more intriguingly, Sullivan's notes suggested that he had deliberately concealed this discovery, creating the hidden access from the cabin and implementing what he called security protocols to protect the site. One map in particular caught her attention, a detailed rendering of what appeared to be a tunnel system extending from the hidden chamber beneath the cabin to the original Silver Peak mine approximately a quarter-mile away. But unlike the crude mining tunnels she had seen in historical photographs, the passage Sullivan had documented was remarkably well-engineered with proper support structures and even what appeared to be a rail system for moving materials. At the end of the tunnel, Sullivan had marked a chamber with the notation, "Primary deposit estimated, yield exceeds all projections. Keep secure at all costs." The implication was staggering. Sullivan had apparently discovered a gold deposit of significant value, had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal and secure it, and then had died or perhaps disappeared before he could exploit his discovery. And now, 70 years later, companies like Vertex Resources were still trying to acquire the property, suggesting the deposit might remain intact and potentially valuable, even by modern standards. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the cabin's grimy windows, Morgan faced the immediate challenge of spending another night in a structure with no electricity, no heat beyond the fireplace, and limited supplies. But despite these practical concerns, she felt a growing excitement about the mystery she had stumbled upon. The abandoned cabin represented more than just shelter or a desperate real estate gamble. It was a puzzle with potentially life-changing implications, one that might provide not just a temporary refuge from financial disaster, but a genuine opportunity to rebuild her life and secure Emma's future. She would need to explore the tunnel properly with adequate lighting and safety precautions. She would need to research Sullivan's background and the true history of the Silver Peak mine. And she would need to understand why Vertex Resources was so interested in acquiring this seemingly worthless property. But as she prepared for her second night in the cabin gathering firewood and clearing decades of dust from what would serve as her bedroom, Morgan felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Whatever secrets lay hidden beneath the cabin and within the mountain beyond, they represented a chance to transform her desperate $400 gamble into something meaningful. The struggling single mother who had lost everything was about to become the custodian of a mystery that had remained hidden for 70 years. Hidden within the mountain beneath her newly acquired cabin lay evidence of a discovery valuable enough to attract corporate interests decades after it had been concealed. But first, she needed to survive another night in a cabin with no electricity, limited supplies, and the growing certainty that her presence at the Silver Peak claim had already attracted attention she hadn't anticipated. As darkness fell over the mountains, Morgan's mind raced with possibilities and questions. Who was Walter Sullivan really? What had he found that was valuable enough to warrant such elaborate concealment? And perhaps most importantly, why was Alexander Holt so interested in this property after all these years? Tomorrow she would begin seeking answers. Tonight, in the flickering firelight of her improbable new home, she allowed herself to believe that her desperate gamble might yet pay off in ways she couldn't have imagined. Morgan's second night in the cabin was interrupted by a sound that sent a chill down her spine. Just after midnight, the floorboards creaked somewhere near the front door. Not the random settling of an old structure, but the deliberate weight of someone moving stealthily. She froze on her makeshift bed, listening intently as the intruder moved through the main room, seemingly searching for something. With her heart pounding, Morgan silently reached for the heavy flashlight she'd placed beside her sleeping bag, gripping it as both a potential light source and a weapon. The footsteps paused near the storage area where she had discovered the hidden door earlier that day. Had Holt returned, or was this someone else with interest in the property? After several tense minutes, the intruder departed as quietly as they had arrived. Morgan waited until she heard the faint sound of a vehicle starting in the distance before she dared move. The intrusion confirmed her suspicions. This property held secrets valuable enough that someone was willing to trespass in the middle of the night to find them. When morning came, Morgan carefully examined the cabin for signs of the nighttime visitor. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed, but near the hidden door she noticed fresh scratches on the floor, evidence that someone had been searching for the entrance to the underground chamber, but had failed to locate the concealed mechanism. The implications were unsettling. Not only was someone aware of the hidden passage, but they knew approximately where to look for it. This wasn't random interest in an abandoned mining cabin. This was targeted knowledge about Sullivan's secret discovery. Morgan spent the morning fortifying the cabin as best she could, securing the windows and reinforcing the door with a crude but effective barricade. She knew these measures wouldn't stop a determined intruder, but they might provide warning if someone attempted to enter while she was exploring the tunnel. By midday, she had gathered supplies for a more thorough exploration, extra batteries for her flashlight, a coil of rope she'd found in the storage area, a water bottle, and Sullivan's journal, which contained maps of what she now realized were the hidden passages rather than the original mine. Before descending into the underground chamber again, Morgan called her daughter, who was staying with a friend's family until Morgan could determine whether the cabin was habitable. "The cabin has potential, sweetie," she told Emma, carefully omitting any mention of hidden passages or nighttime intruders. "It needs work, but the structure is solid and the view is absolutely amazing." "When can I come see it?" Emma asked, her voice conveying the mixture of excitement and uncertainty that had characterized their conversations since Morgan's layoff had upended their lives. Soon, Morgan promised. I need to check a few things first. Make sure everything is safe, but I think you're going to love it here. After ending the call, Morgan opened the hidden door and descended into the underground chamber, this time with proper equipment and determination to discover exactly what Walter Sullivan had found 70 years ago. The tunnel beyond the chamber extended roughly a quarter-mile into the mountain, following what Sullivan's notes identified as a secondary geological formation that the original miners had apparently missed or dismissed. The passage was remarkably well constructed, with timber supports placed at regular intervals and a small rail system for moving ore carts, evidence of significant investment in engineering expertise. About halfway down the tunnel, Morgan encountered the first indication that Sullivan's discovery had been substantial. The passage opened into a larger chamber where the walls glittered with quartz veins shot through with unmistakable traces of gold. Even to her untrained eye, the concentration appeared unusually rich. Sullivan had set up what appeared to be a small-scale processing area in this chamber, with equipment for crushing ore samples and separating gold from surrounding rock. Notebooks filled with test results and yield calculations lay on a workbench protected from moisture by waxed canvas covers. According to these records, Sullivan had discovered that the original Silver Peak mine had been working a relatively minor vein, while the truly valuable deposit lay in an entirely different geological formation that intersected with the main shaft only at its deepest point. But what made Sullivan's discovery particularly significant was its extent. His calculations suggested that the secondary vein was not only richer in gold content, but also substantially larger than anything the original miners had accessed. Notes in the margins of his worksheets estimated potential yields worth millions in 1950s dollars, tens of millions today. As Morgan continued deeper into the tunnel, she began to understand why Sullivan had gone to such lengths to conceal his discovery. The passage eventually connected to what appeared to be the deepest part of the original Silver Peak mine, but through a narrow access point that had been deliberately obscured from the main shaft side. Sullivan had effectively created a secret mine within an abandoned mine, one that he could access exclusively through the hidden tunnel from the cabin. The engineering was impressive, demonstrating both technical skill and careful planning. Near the connection point with the original mine shaft, Morgan found a final chamber that contained Sullivan's most significant work. Here he had excavated deeply into the secondary vein, revealing a spectacular concentration of gold-bearing quartz that ran in thick ribbons through the rock face. Sample bags labeled with dates and yield estimates lined shelves along one wall, each containing crushed ore that still glittered with visible gold particles. Sullivan's final notebook, stored in a waterproof metal container, contained detailed plans for a full-scale mining operation that would exploit the secondary vein without alerting outside interests to its existence. But the last entries in this notebook revealed why those plans had never been implemented. Dated just days before Sullivan's reported death, they expressed concern about unwanted attention from government geological survey teams and corporate interests that had begun exploring the surrounding area. Security measures have been enhanced, Sullivan had written. All evidence of secondary operations concealed. Access limited to cabin route only. Documentation secured. If necessary, activation protocols are in place for future recovery. The final entry, written the day before his supposed hiking accident, was particularly cryptic. Contingency plan implemented. Official record will show termination of operations. Asset preservation protocols in effect. Recovery instructions secured according to established parameters. Morgan sat on a wooden crate in the chamber, trying to piece together the implications of Sullivan's notes. It appeared that he had discovered a gold deposit valuable enough to attract significant attention, had taken extraordinary measures to conceal it, and had then either died unexpectedly or, more intriguingly, had staged his death to protect his discovery. The asset preservation protocols and recovery instructions suggested that Sullivan had intended for the mine to be rediscovered and developed at some future date, presumably when whatever threats he perceived had passed. But if that was the case, why had those instructions never been found? And why had the property remained abandoned for 70 years? As she was contemplating these questions, Morgan noticed something unusual about the metal container that had held Sullivan's final notebook. The bottom appeared slightly thicker than necessary for a simple document box. Examining it more closely, she discovered that it had a false bottom concealing a hidden compartment. Inside this compartment, lay a sealed envelope addressed simply to the finder in a small leather pouch. The envelope contained a letter written in Sullivan's precise handwriting. To whoever has discovered this letter, if you are reading this, you have demonstrated the curiosity, intelligence, and determination necessary to uncover what I have so carefully concealed. The Silver Peak claim contains a gold deposit of extraordinary value, one that I discovered while conducting what was supposed to be a routine geological survey for the Bureau of Land Management in 1953. The secondary vein, which was entirely missed by the original miners, contains gold concentrations that by my calculations would yield approximately 30,000 ounces from the accessible portions alone. At today's values, this represents millions of dollars in recoverable assets. However, my discovery attracted unwanted attention from both government and private interests who sought to seize control of the claim through means both legal and otherwise. When it became clear that I could not develop the mine without losing control of it, I implemented what I termed asset preservation protocols, essentially concealing all evidence of the secondary vein and creating a hidden access route that only someone with proper knowledge could discover. My reported death in a hiking accident was, as you may have surmised, a necessary fiction. It allowed me to disappear while ensuring that the property would remain in legal limbo, tied up in my estate for decades if necessary, until the proper person could discover what I had found. The enclosed pouch contains two items: a gold nugget from the richest section of the vein, which should demonstrate the quality of the deposit, and a key. The key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Denver, where I have left detailed geological surveys, legal documentation, establishing clear title to the mineral rights, and evidence of the attempts to illegally seize the property that forced me into hiding. You now face a choice similar to mine. The deposit is valuable enough to attract significant attention if publicly revealed. Development would require substantial investment and would undoubtedly attract the same kinds of interests that threatened my operations 70 years ago. However, with proper legal protection and careful planning, the mine could be developed responsibly and profitably. The documentation in the safe deposit box should provide sufficient legal leverage to protect your interests if you choose to pursue development. Whatever you decide, I wish you better fortune than I experienced. The Silver Peak claim represents not just material wealth, but a remarkable geological anomaly that deserves proper appreciation. Sincerely, Walter Sullivan, May 14, 1954. Morgan's hands trembled as she opened the leather pouch. Inside was a gold nugget roughly the size of a walnut, larger than anything she had seen in museum displays of Colorado mining history, and a small brass key with a numbered tag. The implications were staggering. Sullivan hadn't died in a hiking accident. He had staged his death to protect his discovery and had left instructions for a future finder. Instructions that had remained hidden for 70 years, until Morgan's desperate $400 purchase had placed her in a position to discover them. The gold nugget alone was probably worth thousands of dollars, but it represented just a tiny fraction of what Sullivan claimed remained in the undeveloped vein. If his estimates were accurate, the hidden mine contained gold worth tens of millions at current prices. As Morgan carefully returned to the cabin, emerging from the hidden passage into the late afternoon sunlight, she tried to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. Her impulsive purchase of an abandoned cabin had potentially given her control of a gold deposit valuable enough to completely transform her financial situation. But Sullivan's letter had also hinted at dangers: government and private interests willing to use questionable means to seize control of the claim. The nighttime intruder and Holt's suspiciously timed visit suggested that those interests might still be active, perhaps alerted by her purchase of the property or her presence at the long-abandoned cabin. She needed to access the safe deposit box Sullivan mentioned, but that would require a trip to Denver, leaving the cabin unprotected while she was gone. She also needed legal advice about her rights to the mineral deposits and how best to protect them from potential challenges. As darkness fell over the mountains for the third time since her arrival, Morgan sat on the cabin's front step watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The beauty of the setting contrasted sharply with the gravity of her situation and the decisions she now faced. Sullivan's hidden gold mine represented an opportunity that could solve all her financial problems and secure Emma's future. But it also placed her in a position that Sullivan himself had found untenable 70 years ago, forced into faking his own death to escape interests determined to seize control of his discovery. The nighttime intruder Holt's suspiciously prompt visit and the elaborate concealment measures Sullivan had implemented all suggested that developing the mine would involve significant challenges beyond the merely technical. Yet the potential reward was too substantial to ignore, especially given her desperate financial circumstances. Morgan carefully secured the gold nugget key and Sullivan's letter in her backpack. Tomorrow she would drive to Denver, access Sullivan's safe deposit box, and seek legal counsel about her rights to the mineral deposits. But tonight she would take additional precautions to protect what she had discovered. Using materials from the storage area, she rigged simple but effective alarms on all potential entry points to the cabin. Nothing sophisticated, just arrangements of cans and fishing line that would create noise if disturbed. She then moved her sleeping bag to the underground chamber, reasoning that even if someone entered the cabin, they would be unlikely to discover the hidden passage if they hadn't found it during previous searches. As she settled into her unusual sleeping arrangement, surrounded by Sullivan's mining equipment and geological samples, Morgan felt a strange sense of connection to the man who had created this hidden world. Like her, he had faced circumstances that threatened to overwhelm him. And like her, he had refused to surrender what he had rightfully discovered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, navigating Denver traffic, accessing a decades-old safe deposit box, finding trustworthy legal advice. But tonight, in the silent darkness beneath the mountain, Morgan allowed herself to believe that Sullivan's legacy might provide the second chance she so desperately needed. She drifted off to sleep with the gold nugget clutched in her hand, a tangible reminder that sometimes the most desperate gambles yield the most extraordinary results. The abandoned cabin she had purchased with her last $400 might just hold the key to a future brighter than anything she had dared to imagine. The journey to Denver began before dawn, with Morgan carefully securing the hidden entrance to the tunnel and disguising any signs of her discoveries. She packed Sullivan's letter, the gold nugget, and his key in her backpack, unwilling to leave such valuable evidence behind. The drive down from the mountains gave her time to process everything she had learned and to formulate a plan for navigating the challenges ahead. Denver's morning traffic was a jarring contrast to the isolated tranquility of the cabin. After months of unemployment and financial struggle, Morgan felt oddly disconnected from the rush of professional activity, people hurrying to jobs with steady paychecks and clear career paths, a world she had involuntarily left behind. But today, with Sullivan's key in her pocket and the gold nuggets safely hidden in her bag, she moved through the city with renewed purpose. First National Bank had changed names several times since Sullivan's day, but the historic building in downtown Denver still housed the original vault and safe deposit facilities. Morgan approached the service desk with a mixture of confidence and apprehension. "I need to access a safe deposit box," she explained to the middle-aged woman behind the counter. "It's quite old, from 1954. The woman's professional smile faltered slightly. "That's unusual. Do you have the key and box number?" Morgan produced Sullivan's key with its attached number tag. "It may be under the name Walter Sullivan." This prompted a more thorough examination of bank records involving a manager and several minutes of computer searches and consultation of older paper ledgers kept for historical accounts. "This is remarkable," the manager finally said. "The box is indeed registered to Walter Sullivan, with annual fees paid through an automatic deduction from a trust account established in 1954. According to our records, it hasn't been accessed since its creation." The revelation that Sullivan had established a mechanism to maintain the safe deposit box for decades confirmed Morgan's growing suspicion that his death had been carefully staged, part of a comprehensive plan to preserve his discoveries until they could be safely recovered. After verifying Morgan's identification and recording her access in the bank security log, the manager escorted her to the vault. "Safe deposit contents from this era are sometimes damaged by time," he warned. "Paper becomes brittle, metals can corrode, just so you're prepared." But when the box was opened, Morgan found its contents in pristine condition, protected by careful packaging and the vault's climate-controlled environment. Sullivan had prepared these materials for long-term preservation, sealing documents in waxed paper and storing photographs in acid-free envelopes. The contents were even more extensive than Sullivan's letter had suggested: detailed geological surveys of the secondary vein, legal documentation establishing his rightful ownership of the Silver Peak claim, and correspondence that revealed the true circumstances of his disappearance. According to these letters, Sullivan had been approached by representatives of a mining consortium with connections to government officials shortly after his discovery. Their initial offers to purchase the claim had seemed legitimate, but when he declined, the pressure had escalated to include threats, surveillance, and what Sullivan described as irregular legal maneuvers designed to force transfer of ownership. Most disturbing were Sullivan's notes about a visit from federal agents who had informed him that the Silver Peak claim was being considered for seizure under national security provisions, a process that would provide minimal compensation and no right of appeal. The justification had been vague references to strategic mineral resources and national defense requirements that Sullivan suspected were merely pretexts for claiming the gold deposit. Faced with these escalating threats, Sullivan had implemented his asset preservation protocol, staging his death in a hiking accident while actually relocating to California under an assumed identity. His plan had been meticulously executed, involving trusted allies who had helped create a convincing accident scene and falsified death certificate. But the most valuable documents in the safe deposit box were the legal instruments Sullivan had created to protect the future of his discovery. He had established an irrevocable trust that maintained minimal property tax payments while creating deliberate legal obstacles to any attempted sale or transfer of the property. The trust documents included provisions that would activate only under specific conditions, conditions that Sullivan had apparently designed to identify a worthy successor. The final item in the safe deposit box was a sealed envelope addressed to my successor in Sullivan's precise handwriting. Inside, Morgan found a letter dated 2 weeks before his staged death. To the person who has followed the path I created, your discovery of this letter confirms what I hoped, that someone with intelligence, determination, and integrity would eventually find what I was forced to conceal. The Silver Peak mine contains wealth that rightfully belongs to whoever has the courage and foresight to develop it properly. But that wealth comes with challenges beyond the merely technical. The legal documents included with this letter establish your clear title to both the property and its mineral rights, structured to withstand the challenges that forced me into hiding. The trust I established has maintained the property while creating deliberate barriers to outside acquisition barriers designed to remain in place until someone demonstrated the qualities necessary to become my successor. Your purchase of the property through the tax auction, discovery of the hidden tunnel, and access to the safe deposit box represent the completion of a selection process I designed to identify someone worthy of continuing what I began. The apparent coincidence of the property becoming available just when you needed it was in fact the final activation of trust provisions established decades ago. The geological surveys confirm what you have likely already discovered. The secondary vein contains gold deposits of exceptional quality and quantity, conservatively valued at several $1,000,000, even by 1950s standards. With modern mining techniques, the recoverable value would be substantially higher. You now face choices similar to those that confronted me, but with advantages I lacked. The legal framework I created provides protection against the kinds of maneuvers used against me, and the documentation included here offers evidence of the questionable tactics employed by those who sought to seize the claim. My advice, based on difficult experience, is to proceed cautiously but confidently. Secure proper technical assistance from independent sources before attempting any significant development. Establish legal safeguards through multiple channels to protect your interests, and be prepared for opposition from entities that may have maintained interest in the property throughout the decades. The Silver Peak claim represents not just material wealth, but a legacy of persistence and foresight. Whatever course you choose, I wish you the wisdom to use its resources wisely and the strength to protect what is rightfully yours. With respect and confidence in your abilities. Walter Sullivan, May 1st, 1954. Morgan sat in the bank's private consultation room, surrounded by Sullivan's carefully preserved legacy, feeling a profound connection to a man she had never met, but whose challenges now mirrored her own. Like Sullivan, she faced decisions about how to protect and develop a valuable discovery while navigating potential threats from powerful interests. But unlike Sullivan, who had been forced to abandon his discovery and assume a new identity, Morgan had the benefit of his foresight legal protections. He had established documentation of the tactics used against him and guidance based on his experiences. Her next step was clear. She needed competent legal representation from someone who could help her understand the full implications of Sullivan's trust arrangements and develop a strategy for securing her rights to the gold deposit. After carefully returning the documents to the safe deposit box, keeping only what she needed for immediate consultation, Morgan headed to the office of Catherine Winters, an attorney specializing in mining law, whom she had researched that morning. Winters' firm was located in a historic building near Denver's courthouse, its modest decor suggesting a focus on substance rather than appearances. The attorney herself, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s with prematurely silver hair, listened to Morgan's abbreviated account of her discoveries without interruption, examining Sullivan's documents with methodical attention. This is one of the most fascinating cases I've encountered in 25 years of practice, Winters finally said, placing Sullivan's trust documents on her desk. Sullivan created a legal framework that was decades ahead of its time in terms of sophistication and foresight. Does it provide the protection he intended? Morgan asked. Remarkably, yes. The trust structure effectively prevented anyone from acquiring the property through normal channels, while the tax payment system ensured it wouldn't be lost through tax delinquency. The provision allowing for auction under specific conditions, essentially when the trust identified a suitable successor, was particularly ingenious. Morgan felt a chill at this confirmation. You're saying the timing of the tax auction wasn't coincidental, that Sullivan's trust somehow arranged for the property to become available specifically when I would find it? Winters smiled slightly. Not in any mystical sense, but the trust documents include criteria for releasing the property, financial conditions in the mining industry, changes in local property development patterns, even seasonal factors that would affect initial exploration. When those conditions aligned, the trust was programmed to stop tax payments, triggering the auction process. And I just happened to be the person who saw the listing. Sullivan's system wasn't designed to identify a specific individual, but rather someone with certain qualities: financial motivation, willingness to take calculated risks, research skills to discover the property's potential. Your background in environmental compliance would have given you advantages in understanding the technical aspects of his documentation. Morgan considered this explanation, finding it simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. Sullivan had created a system to identify a worthy successor based on attributes rather than identity, and somehow across 7 decades that system had selected her. Moving forward, Winters continued, the trust documentation provides strong legal protection for your ownership of both the property and mineral rights. Sullivan's careful record-keeping regarding the attempts to seize his claim gives us additional leverage against similar tactics. However, development of the mine will require proper permits, environmental assessments, and significant investment. What about Vertex Resources? They've already approached me about buying the property. Winters' expression sharpened. Vertex has a reputation for aggressive acquisition of historic mining claims, particularly those with untapped potential. Their geological survey teams are excellent, which suggests they may have identified the secondary veins Sullivan discovered. I'd recommend extreme caution in any dealings with them. And the government interests Sullivan mentioned, could they still try to seize the property under national security provisions? The legal landscape has changed significantly since the 1950s. The documentation Sullivan preserved would make such a seizure legally problematic today, particularly given the questionable justifications used then. However, proper development will require compliance with current environmental and safety regulations. By the end of their consultation, Morgan had a clearer understanding of both her legal position and the challenges ahead. Winters agreed to represent her interests, beginning with a thorough review of Sullivan's documentation and preparation of strategies to protect her ownership rights. One final piece of advice, Winters said, as Morgan prepared to leave: trust selectively and verify thoroughly. Sullivan's experience suggests that multiple entities had interest in his discovery, some operating within legal boundaries, others willing to cross those lines. That pattern may well continue with your rediscovery of the mine. The warning echoed in Morgan's mind as she drove back toward the mountains, Sullivan's documentation secured in a folder beside her. She had entered this situation through financial desperation, but now found herself navigating complex legal, technical, and potentially dangerous territory. As she climbed the winding mountain roads toward the cabin, Morgan noticed a vehicle parked at a scenic overlook, a black SUV that looked suspiciously like Holt's Range Rover. It was positioned with a clear view of the access road to the Silver Peak property, suggesting surveillance rather than tourism. Instead of continuing directly to the cabin, Morgan took a detour to Pine Haven, the small town 15 miles from her property. The general store doubled as a community gathering place, and she hoped to learn more about local perceptions of the Silver Peak claim without revealing her specific interests. The store's proprietor, a weathered man in his 60s who introduced himself simply as Mac, responded to her casual questions about local history with the expansive enthusiasm of someone who rarely got fresh audiences for his stories. Silver Peak Mine. That's got more legends attached to it than almost any property in the county, he explained while ringing up the supplies Morgan had selected. Old Man Silver Peak worked that claim for 50 years, never struck it particularly rich, but made a steady living. Then this government fellow Sullivan buys it in 53, spends a few months doing who knows what up there, and then supposedly dies in a hiking accident. Supposedly, Morgan prompted. Mac lowered his voice, though the store was empty except for them. My father was on the search and rescue team that responded when Sullivan was reported missing. He always said the scene didn't look right, boot prints going up to a dangerous ledge, but none coming back, equipment too neatly arranged, no signs of struggle or accident, like it was staged. What happened to the property after that? That's the strangest part. For 70 years, nobody could buy it even though plenty tried. Mining companies made offers way above market value. Developers wanted to turn it into some fancy retreat. Even the government tried to claim it for some park expansion. But every time something would happen, legal complications, title problems, environmental concerns, and now someone has finally bought it. Who, Morgan asked, maintaining the pretense that she didn't know who owned the property. Mac nodded. Tax auction last week. Word is some city woman got it for practically nothing. Folks around here are taking bets on how long before she sells to Vertex or one of the other companies that have been sniffing around that property for decades. What's Vertex's interest in an old abandoned mine? They claim historical preservation, but that's nonsense. They've been surveying all the properties around the Silver Peak claim for years using every technology imaginable. Their geologists practically lived up in these mountains last summer. Whatever they're looking for, they're serious about finding it. This confirmation of Vertex's methodical interest in the area reinforced Morgan's concerns. If they had conducted extensive geological surveys of surrounding properties, they likely had at least theoretical knowledge of the secondary vein Sullivan had discovered. Their inability to access the Silver Peak property directly thanks to Sullivan's legal obstacles explained their immediate approach when she acquired it. As Morgan prepared to leave, Mac added one final piece of information that sent a chill through her. Strangest thing happened yesterday. Government vehicles up on the access road to the Silver Peak property, not local federal plates. 3 black SUVs and what looked like some kind of technical equipment. They told Fred Johnson, who owns the adjacent property, they were conducting an environmental assessment of historic mining sites, but Fred says they seemed mighty interested in that specific piece of land for a random survey. The revelation that federal agencies were showing active interest in the property confirmed Sullivan's warnings about potential government involvement. Between Vertex's corporate interest and apparent federal attention, the Silver Peak claim was attracting exactly the kind of scrutiny Sullivan had fled decades earlier. Morgan thanked Mac for the information and headed back to her vehicle, mind racing with implications. The situation was escalating faster than she had anticipated, with multiple entities clearly aware of her purchase and potentially its significance. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Morgan faced a critical decision. Should she continue pursuing Sullivan's legacy despite the growing signs of powerful opposition? Or should she take Vertex's offer and walk away with a quick profit, leaving the challenges of developing the mine to someone else? The answer came more easily than she expected. She hadn't fought through 10 months of financial hardship and professional disappointment to abandon an opportunity of this magnitude at the first sign of difficulty. Sullivan had trusted his successor to have the determination and integrity to complete what he had begun. Now it was her responsibility to prove him right. With renewed resolve, Morgan turned her Honda toward the mountain road that led to the Silver Peak cabin, her cabin now and the extraordinary legacy hidden beneath it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same resourcefulness and perseverance that had brought her this far. The gold deposit Sullivan had preserved for 70 years represented not just material wealth, but the possibility of independence and security for herself, for Emma, and perhaps for the community that had maintained the secrets of the Silver Peak claim for generations. It was an inheritance worth fighting for, and Morgan Hayes was just beginning to discover how far she would go to protect it. As Morgan approached the cabin in the gathering twilight, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door stood slightly ajar, though she was certain she had secured it before leaving. Pulling her car to a stop at a distance, she surveyed the scene cautiously. No vehicles were visible, but fresh tire tracks in the dirt suggested recent visitors. For a moment, she considered driving away and returning with help, but the thought of someone tampering with Sullivan's hidden chamber spurred her to action. Moving quietly, she approached the cabin from the side, peering through a dusty window to check for intruders before cautiously entering. The interior had been thoroughly searched. Furniture was moved, and floorboards had been pried up in places, and the storage area where the hidden entrance was located showed signs of particular attention. Whoever had conducted the search had been methodical and professional, leaving minimal obvious damage, but examining every potential hiding place. With growing apprehension, Morgan moved to the concealed door that led to Sullivan's underground chamber. To her relief, it appeared undisturbed. The intruders had failed to discover the ingenious latch mechanism, despite their thorough search. The tunnel and its valuable contents remained secure, at least for now. After verifying that the cabin was empty, Morgan called Catherine Winters from her cell phone, reporting the break-in while keeping her voice low despite the apparent absence of intruders. "This escalates our timeline," Winters advised. "I've already begun filing the necessary documentation to establish your legal position, but we need to accelerate our protective measures. Do you have someone who could stay with you at the property? Isolation makes you vulnerable." The suggestion prompted Morgan to call her brother Jason, a contractor whose protective instincts had sometimes annoyed but always comforted his younger sister. Currently between major projects, he might be persuaded to help assess and secure the cabin, providing both practical assistance and a trusted presence during this critical period. "You bought a what?" Jason's incredulous voice came through the phone. "With your last $400, Morgan, have you lost your mind?" "It's complicated, Jason," she replied, carefully omitting mention of the gold mine until she could explain in person. "But I need your help. The cabin needs serious renovation work before winter, and there's been some trouble with trespassers." Despite his initial skepticism, Jason agreed to drive up the following day with his truck and tools. "I'll bring some security equipment too," he added, his protective instincts immediately engaged by the mention of trespassers. "Trail cameras, better locks, maybe even a portable generator, so you're not sitting in the dark every night." That night, Morgan slept in the underground chamber, again reasonably confident that any return visitors would still be unable to locate the hidden entrance. As she lay on her sleeping bag surrounded by Sullivan's meticulous work, she felt an increasing sense of responsibility toward the legacy he had preserved. This wasn't just about financial opportunity anymore. It was about honoring the extraordinary efforts of a man who had faced powerful opposition with ingenuity and foresight. Jason Hayes arrived the following morning, his work truck loaded with construction supplies, security equipment, and the practical optimism that had always characterized Morgan's older brother. His initial skepticism about her impulsive real estate venture transformed into impressed whistling as he conducted a thorough inspection of the cabin structure. "The bones of this place are incredible," he declared, tapping the solid pine logs that formed the cabin's walls. "Craftsmen built this to last centuries, not decades. Modern contractors don't put this kind of care into multi-million-dollar homes, let alone mining cabins." Morgan had decided to trust Jason completely, showing him the hidden entrance and explaining everything she had discovered about Sullivan and the secondary gold vein. Her brother's practical nature served as a perfect counterbalance to the almost fantastical nature of her discovery. His questions focused on structural stability, security vulnerabilities, and renovation priorities rather than the dramatic implications of Sullivan's legacy. So this Sullivan fellow faked his death to protect his discovery, created an elaborate legal mechanism to preserve it for decades, and somehow selected you as his successor through a system he designed in the 1950s, Jason summarized as they examined the tunnel entrance. "That's either the most elaborate estate plan in history or the plot of a Hollywood thriller." "The documentation confirms everything," Morgan replied. "Catherine Winters says Sullivan's legal framework was decades ahead of its time, and the gold deposit is real. I've seen it myself." Jason nodded, his expression turning more serious. "I believe you, but Morgan, you need to understand what you're up against. If this deposit is as valuable as Sullivan claimed, powerful interests will use every means available to take control of it. Your legal position might be strong on paper, but that doesn't always translate to practical protection. His concern prompted Morgan to share her worries about the property searches and surveillance she had detected. Jason immediately began implementing enhanced security measures, motion-activated cameras in concealed locations around the property, reinforced locks on all entrances, and a solar-powered alarm system that would alert them to any intrusion. The cabin needs substantial work before winter, he explained as they created a renovation plan. New roof, upgraded insulation, proper heating system, reliable water source. But our first priority is securing the hidden entrance. If the gold deposit is your primary asset, protecting access to it is essential. Over the next 3 days, Jason transformed the hidden door mechanism from Sullivan's manual system to a reinforced entrance with both mechanical and electronic security. The entrance remained concealed, but now featured a locking system that would resist forced entry even if discovered. Meanwhile, Morgan worked with Catherine Winters to file the legal documentation that would secure her ownership rights. Sullivan's meticulous record-keeping proved invaluable, providing evidence of legitimate acquisition and clear title that withstood initial scrutiny from county officials. In the inquiries Winters reported from interested parties seeking information about the property's status. On the 4th day after Jason's arrival, they received their first official visitor, a representative from the Environmental Protection Agency, who presented credentials and a formal notice of inspection for potential hazardous materials typical of historic mining operations. The agent, a methodical woman named Jensen, who wore the standard-issue government field gear with the comfort of someone accustomed to remote locations, conducted a professional assessment of the property's exterior areas, focusing particularly on soil samples near the visible mine entrance. This is standard procedure for properties with historic mining activity, Jensen explained as she collected samples in labeled containers. Many abandoned mines contain heavy metals, chemical residues from processing operations, or naturally occurring hazards exposed through excavation. Morgan maintained a cooperative but cautious approach, answering questions about her renovation plans while volunteering no information about Sullivan's hidden tunnel or the secondary vein. Jason kept busy with visible construction work, presenting the image of a simple renovation project rather than a high-value mineral discovery. Jensen's inspection appeared thorough but routine until she asked an unexpected question. Ms. Hayes, are you aware of any underground structures or excavations on the property beyond the documented Silver Peak mine entrance? The question's precision suggested specific knowledge rather than standard procedure. Morgan felt Jason tense beside her, though his expression remained neutral as he continued measuring lumber for the roof repairs. The property records only mention the main mine entrance, Morgan replied carefully. I haven't explored it for safety reasons. Why do you ask? Jensen consulted her tablet, swiping through what appeared to be geological survey data. Historical mining claims sometimes included exploratory shafts or secondary entrances that weren't documented in official records. We're required to assess all potential contamination vectors, including undocumented excavations. The explanation sounded reasonable, but Morgan remained unconvinced. Jensen's interests seemed too specific. Her questions too precisely targeted at information that should have been unknown to government agencies if Sullivan's concealment had been effective. After Jensen departed with her samples and notes, Jason voiced the concern that had been building throughout the inspection. That wasn't a routine environmental assessment. She was looking for something specific, something they think is here but can't locate without accessing the property directly. Morgan nodded, recalling Sullivan's notes about government interest in his discovery. But why now after 70 years, and how would they know about the secondary vein if Sullivan's concealment worked? Modern geological survey technology can detect anomalies that weren't identifiable in the 1950s, Jason suggested. Ground-penetrating radar satellite imaging, specialized sensors. They might have identified the deposit without knowing exactly how to access it. The possibility was concerning. If government agencies had detected the secondary vein through technological means, they might be pursuing access through regulatory channels, environmental assessments, safety inspections, or other official processes that would be difficult to legally refuse. Later that afternoon, while Jason continued work on the cabin's roof, Morgan met with Sarah Blackwood, the county assessor who had been recommended by Catherine Winters as someone knowledgeable about the property's history. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in Pine Haven, away from the watchful eyes that seemed increasingly focused on the cabin. Blackwood, a composed woman in her early 60s, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent a lifetime in the mountains, studied Morgan with frank curiosity. "I've been with the county office for 35 years, she said after introductions. "During that time, we have had at least 6 serious attempts to purchase the Silver Peak property, offers well above market value from mining companies, private investors, even government agencies. All of them were blocked by peculiarities in Sullivan's will and estate provisions that effectively prevented the sale." She fixed Morgan with a direct gaze. Then suddenly, after decades of legal gridlock, the property becomes available through a tax auction with minimal public notice, and you happen to be the only bidder. Doesn't that strike you as unusual? Morgan felt exposed, as if Blackwood could somehow see through her casual demeanor to the discoveries she had made. "Are you suggesting there was something improper about the auction?" "Not improper, no," Blackwood replied. "Everything was legally correct, but convenient perhaps for someone who might want the property to pass quietly to a buyer who appeared to have no connection to the historical interests." The implication was clear. Blackwood suspected that Morgan's presence at the auction hadn't been coincidental, that she might be a front for one of the interests that had been trying to acquire the property for decades. "I assure you, Ms. Blackwood, my interest in this property was entirely based on my personal circumstances. I needed affordable housing after losing my job in Denver, and this was within my extremely limited budget." The truth of this statement gave Morgan's voice a conviction that seemed to register with the county official. Blackwood studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you, Ms. Hayes, but that doesn't mean you haven't stumbled into something complicated. This property has a history of attracting attention, not all of it benign." She lowered her voice, though the cafe was nearly empty. "Just yesterday, after the auction records were processed, we had inquiries about this parcel from 3 different sources: Vertex Resources, a Denver law firm representing unnamed clients, and a federal agency that claimed to be conducting an environmental assessment of historic mining claims." Morgan's pulse quickened. "Vertex Resources sent a representative out to the cabin the day after I acquired it, a man named Holt. He offered to buy the property for well above market value just hours after I arrived." Blackwood nodded, unsurprised. "Alexander Holt has been trying to acquire this property for Vertex for at least 5 years. Every time the legal obstacles seemed close to resolution, something would happen to restart the process. A previously unknown heir would emerge, and a technical issue with the title would surface, or a government agency would file an environmental concern that required assessment. What does Vertex want with an abandoned mining cabin? Officially, they specialize in redeveloping historic mining properties, turning them into luxury retreats or private museums that celebrate Colorado's mining heritage. But they're also known for reopening selected mines when geological surveys suggest untapped potential." Blackwood's tone made it clear she suspected Vertex's interest went well beyond historical preservation. "Ms. Hayes, I don't know what's on this property that makes it so attractive to companies like Vertex, but I've worked for the county long enough to recognize when something doesn't quite add up. If you found anything unusual here, you might want to secure proper legal advice before proceeding." The warning was delivered with genuine concern, making Morgan think that perhaps Blackwood could be a potential ally rather than another person with hidden motives. "Thank you for the advice," she said. "I'm still exploring the property and assessing what I've purchased." Blackwood nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. "My office can provide information about grants for historic preservation if you're interested in restoring the cabin. And if you have questions about the property's history or legal status, feel free to contact me directly." She handed Morgan a business card with both office and personal contact information. As Morgan returned to the cabin in the late afternoon light, she found Jason installing a solar panel system that would provide basic electricity enough for light security devices and small appliances. "I picked these up in Pine Haven," he explained. "The general store owner gave me a good deal when I explained we were renovating the old Silver Peak cabin. Apparently, there's a lot of local interest in seeing it restored rather than demolished for some corporate development." This information suggested potential community support that Morgan hadn't considered a valuable resource in what was increasingly looking like a contentious situation. If local residents preferred historic preservation to corporate development, they might become allies in protecting the property from Vertex's aggressive acquisition attempts. As the sun began to set, Morgan and Jason sat on the cabin's front porch, watching the mountains fade into silhouette against the darkening sky. The beauty of the setting contrasted sharply with the growing complications of their situation. "What exactly are you planning to do with Sullivan's mine?" Jason asked, his practical mind focused on next steps rather than abstract possibilities. Morgan had been considering this question since discovering Sullivan's letter. "I want to develop it responsibly. Minimal environmental impact, proper safety measures, transparent operation. The gold deposit could secure Emma's future and maybe help revitalize Pine Haven too. But first I need to establish ironclad legal protection and find trustworthy technical expertise." Jason nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You'll need significant capital for proper development. Even with Sullivan's documentation and clear title, mining operations require substantial investment. Catherine Winters mentioned specialized mining development firms that provide equipment and expertise in exchange for a percentage of yield rather than ownership of the claim. It could be a way to proceed without risking control of the property." As darkness settled over the cabin, Jason activated the security system he had installed: motion sensors, trail cameras, and alarms that would alert them to any nighttime visitors. The measures seemed almost excessive until Morgan remembered the break-in and the increasing interest from both Vertex and government agencies. Later that night, as Jason slept in the cabin's small bedroom and Morgan settled into the more secure underground chamber, she examined some of Sullivan's personal documents more carefully. Among his papers was a faded photograph of a young Sullivan standing beside a woman and a small child, presumably his family, though they weren't mentioned in any of his letters or official records. On the back of the photograph was written, "Elizabeth and Sarah Silver Peak Cabin, Summer 1950. The image revealed a personal dimension to Sullivan that had been absent from his technical and legal documentation, a reminder that behind the elaborate security measures and legal frameworks was a man who had apparently sacrificed his family life to protect his discovery. As Morgan was about to return the photograph to its folder, she noticed something unusual about the setting. In the background of the image, barely visible but unmistakable to someone who had studied the property, was a rock formation with distinctive markings that she recognized from her explorations of the cabin grounds. But the peculiar thing was a small symbol carved into the rock, what appeared to be a miner's pick, crossed with another tool in a pattern that seemed deliberate rather than decorative. The discovery sent a shiver of excitement through her. Could this be another of Sullivan's clues, a marker for something he had concealed beyond the mine itself? The possibility added yet another layer to the already complex mystery of the Silver Peak claim. As Morgan finally drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the echoes of Sullivan's presence, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had only begun to uncover the secrets of her $400 cabin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, continuing renovations, legal maneuvers, and the constant pressure from those who sought to control what Sullivan had preserved. But for the first time in nearly a year, those challenges felt like opportunities rather than burdens. The desperate financial gamble that had brought her to this remote mountain cabin had become something far more significant, a mission to honor Sullivan's legacy while securing her own future and her daughter's. Whatever secrets remained hidden in the Silver Peak claim, Morgan Hayes was determined to uncover them on her own terms. "Mom, this is amazing!" Emma's voice echoed with excitement as she spun in a circle on the cabin's front porch, taking in the panoramic mountain view. After 2 weeks of intensive renovation work by Jason and careful legal preparation by Catherine Winters, Morgan had finally brought her daughter to see their new home. The cabin had undergone a remarkable transformation. The sagging roof had been replaced with new cedar shingles, the broken windows fitted with energy-efficient panes, and the interior thoroughly cleaned and restored. Jason's solar panel system provided reliable electricity, and a new propane tank supplied the recently installed heating system and stove. "I told you it had potential," Morgan said, watching her daughter's face light up with genuine joy for the first time in months. Since the layoff, Emma had been stoically brave, never complaining about the downsizing of their life, but the strain had shown in the shadows under her eyes and her diminished enthusiasm. "Can I explore?" Emma asked, already moving toward the forest edge where a small creek tumbled over moss-covered rocks. "Stay within sight of the cabin," Morgan cautioned, And be careful near the old mine entrance, it's not stable. As Emma bounded off to investigate their new property, Jason emerged from the storage room where he'd been installing additional security features. She seems happy, he observed, watching his niece examining a cluster of wildflowers with the intense focus of an 11-year-old naturalist. Happier than I've seen her in a long time, Morgan agreed. This place is already working its magic on her. Speaking of magic, Jason lowered his voice. I've finished securing the hidden entrance. The new system requires both the physical key and a 6-digit code. Even if someone finds the door, they won't be getting through without both. The enhanced security measures had become increasingly necessary as interest in the property continued to grow. Over the past 2 weeks, they had documented 3 more official visits, another EPA inspection, a Bureau of Land Management survey team, and county officials verifying property boundaries. Each visit had been professionally conducted but featured subtle questions about underground structures or unexplored areas of the property. More concerning were the nighttime activities captured by Jason's trail cameras, unidentified figures conducting what appeared to be geological surveys using handheld equipment at the perimeter of the property, carefully staying just outside the legal boundaries to avoid trespassing charges. Catherine Winters had responded by accelerating the legal protection strategy, filing documentation that established Morgan's clear title to both the property and its mineral rights based on Sullivan's meticulous records. She had also submitted formal complaints about the unauthorized surveys, putting both Vertex Resources and various government agencies on notice that the property's boundaries were being actively monitored. Later that afternoon, as Morgan prepared dinner in the newly renovated kitchen, she watched through the window as Emma sorted through a collection of rocks she had gathered from around the property. Her daughter had always been fascinated by geology, collecting interesting specimens and researching their composition. It was one of the reasons Morgan had decided to show her Sullivan's discovery, despite the potential risks of sharing such valuable information with a child. Emma, she called through the open window, dinner in 20 minutes, then I have something special to show you. After dinner with the mountain sunset painting the cabin in golden light, Morgan led Emma to the storage room and revealed the hidden entrance to Sullivan's underground chamber. This is like something from a movie, Emma gasped as the concealed door swung open. A secret passage in our own house. Morgan explained Sullivan's story in simplified terms as they descended the stairs, how he had discovered a valuable gold deposit, how others had tried to take it from him, and how he had hidden it until someone worthy could find it. So we're like the treasure hunters who found his secret map? Emma asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Something like that, Morgan smiled. But this isn't just a treasure, Emma. It's a responsibility. Sullivan trusted whoever found this to use it wisely and protect it carefully. The underground chamber captivated Emma immediately. While Morgan had expected her to be most interested in the gold samples, her daughter instead focused on Sullivan's maps and geological specimens, examining them with unexpected comprehension. Mom, look at these markings, she said, pointing to one of Sullivan's tunnel maps. These show where the gold vein runs, but there's something weird about how he's drawn it. See these symbols? They don't match the legend. Morgan looked where Emma was pointing and realized her daughter was right. Small symbols that resembled asterisks appeared at irregular intervals along the marked vein, with no explanation in the map's legend. Maybe they're just places he took samples, Morgan suggested. Emma shook her head with the certainty of a child who knew she was right. No, the sample points are marked with these little circles. These stars are something else. She traced the pattern with her finger. They make a shape if you connect them like a zigzag path. Morgan was impressed by her daughter's observation. She had studied these same maps repeatedly without noticing the pattern Emma had immediately identified. It was another reminder of Sullivan's methodical nature. Even his maps contained hidden information, accessible only to those who look beyond the obvious. As they continued exploring the underground chamber, Emma's movements became increasingly deliberate, as if she were following an invisible trail. She moved to a section of the rough stone wall that Morgan had previously assumed was simply part of the natural cave formation. There's something here, Emma said confidently, running her fingers along a barely perceptible seam in the rock. It feels different from the rest of the wall. Before Morgan could respond, Emma pressed a small protrusion in the stone surface, and a section of the wall shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap. From within this hidden compartment, she pulled out a rolled canvas secured with a leather strap. Emma, how did you? Morgan began, astonished by her daughter's discovery. I don't know, Emma replied, looking slightly surprised herself. It just felt like it was supposed to open, like when you know there's a puzzle piece that fits somewhere specific. Carefully unrolling the canvas on Sullivan's workbench, they found themselves looking at a detailed map unlike any of the others in the chamber. This one showed not just the Silver Peak mine, but the surrounding mountain range, with multiple locations marked with the same star symbols Emma had identified on the tunnel maps. It's a master map, Emma whispered with reverence. Look, our mine is just one of the spots. There are 12 others marked here. Morgan examined the map with growing excitement. Each marked location included what appeared to be coordinates in a small symbol different for each site. The Silver Peak location was marked with a pickaxe symbol, while others featured various mining tools, geological formations, or astronomical signs. What do you think it means? Emma asked, her voice hushed, as if they were in a library or church. I'm not sure, Morgan admitted, but I think Sullivan might have discovered more than just our gold deposit. This looks like it could be a map to multiple sites of significance. The discovery of the hidden map changed everything. If Sullivan had identified multiple valuable deposits throughout the region, it would explain the persistent interest from both private companies and government agencies decades after his disappearance. It might also explain why modern geological surveys had focused so intensely on the area surrounding the Silver Peak claim. We need to keep this absolutely secret, Morgan told Emma, carefully rolling the map and returning it to its hiding place. This might be even more valuable than the gold mine itself. Emma nodded solemnly, understanding the significance of their discovery. Is that why those people keep coming around? Are they looking for this map? They might be, Morgan acknowledged, which means we need to be extra careful about who we trust. As they ascended the stairs back to the cabin's main floor, Morgan was struck by her daughter's natural affinity for Sullivan's work. Emma had spotted patterns and hidden features that Morgan had missed despite weeks of careful study. There seemed to be an almost intuitive connection between her daughter and the long-vanished mining engineer, as if Sullivan had somehow anticipated the specific qualities of his eventual successor. The following morning, Morgan arranged a meeting with Eleanor Reeves, a mining engineer Catherine Winters had recommended as both technically competent and trustworthy. Given the sensitive nature of the discussion, they agreed to meet at Catherine's Denver office, rather than at the cabin itself. Reeves turned out to be a composed woman in her late 40s, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent significant time in the field. She reviewed Sullivan's geological data with professional interest, occasionally nodding or making notes as she examined the detailed surveys and yield calculations. If these surveys are accurate, the secondary vein represents an unusual concentration of high-grade ore. She observed, studying the maps Morgan had brought carefully, excluding the newly discovered master map. The geological formation Sullivan identified is consistent with significant deposits found elsewhere in Colorado, but rarely this accessible or concentrated. Can it be extracted responsibly? Morgan asked. I'm concerned about environmental impact and preservation of the historical aspects of the property. Reeves nodded approvingly at the question. Modern extraction techniques allow for significantly reduced environmental footprint compared to historical methods. For a deposit of this size, targeted extraction, focusing on the highest grade sections, would be more appropriate than large-scale operations. We could develop a plan that minimizes surface disruption and preserves the historical structures. The conversation shifted to practical aspects: permit requirements, equipment needs, processing options, and estimated costs for development. Reeves outlined a phased approach that would begin with detailed assessment of the secondary vein's current condition, followed by limited extraction to establish yield rates before committing to larger-scale operations. Based on Sullivan's documentation and my preliminary analysis, we're potentially looking at recoverable gold worth between $15 and $20 million, depending on extraction efficiency and market prices, Reeves concluded. However, development costs would be substantial: proper equipment, safety systems, environmental controls, processing facilities. You're looking at initial investment of at least $2 million before seeing significant return. The figure was sobering, even in the context of the potential yield. Morgan had escaped immediate financial crisis through her discovery, but developing the mine would require resources far beyond her current means. Traditional financing would be challenging without collateral or mining experience, and bringing in outside investors would mean surrendering control that Sullivan had fought so hard to maintain. There are alternatives to conventional financing. Winters suggested, sensing Morgan's concern. Sullivan's documentation essentially represents proof of reserves, which has value in itself. Specialized mining development firms might provide equipment and expertise in exchange for percentage of yield rather than ownership of the claim. The possibility was encouraging, but Morgan remained cautious about involving outside entities given the interest already shown by Vertex Resources and government agencies. Any partner would need to be thoroughly vetted and contractually constrained from seizing control of the operation. As the meeting concluded, Reeves agreed to prepare a preliminary development plan that would maximize yield while minimizing environmental impact and capital requirements. Morgan would need this plan not only for potential financing partners, but also for the permit applications that would be required before any extraction could begin. Driving back to the cabin that evening, Morgan's mind was filled with the practical challenges of developing Sullivan's discovery. The potential reward was enormous: financial security for herself and Emma, resources to restore the historic cabin properly, perhaps even economic benefits for Pine Haven and the surrounding community. But the path to realizing that potential was fraught with obstacles, financial hurdles, regulatory requirements, and the persistent threat from entities seeking to control the deposit for themselves. As she rounded the final curve in the mountain road, Morgan was surprised to see an unfamiliar vehicle parked beside the cabin, a rugged Jeep bearing the logo of the U.S. Geological Survey. Jason stood on the porch talking with a man who appeared to be in his early 40s, dressed in the casual but functional attire of a field scientist. "Morgan," Jason called as she approached. "This is Dr. Ethan Reed from the USGS. He's conducting a regional geological assessment and had some questions about the property." Dr. Reed extended his hand with a friendly smile. "Ms. Hayes, I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I'm mapping historical mining sites throughout the county for a federal database project." Morgan shook his hand while quickly assessing the situation. Unlike previous official visitors, Reed seemed genuinely engaged in scientific rather than regulatory work. His questions focused on the historical aspects of the mine rather than potential current development, and he showed particular interest in the original Silver Peak family's mining techniques. "Would you mind if I took some rock samples from around the old mine entrance?" he asked. "We're creating a comprehensive geological profile of the region's mining history." The request seemed innocent enough, but after weeks of increasingly intrusive official visits, Morgan had become cautious. "I'd prefer to know exactly what you're looking for and how the samples will be used before agreeing," she replied politely but firmly. Rather than becoming defensive, Reed seemed impressed by her caution. "That's entirely reasonable. The USGS is conducting a multi-year study of historical mining regions throughout Colorado, focusing on both geological composition and environmental impact. All sample data becomes public record available through our open access database." He offered her his business card and a brochure detailing the project. "You're welcome to verify my credentials and the project's legitimacy before deciding. I can come back another time if you prefer." His transparency was refreshing after the evasive responses she'd received from previous visitors. After a brief discussion with Jason, Morgan agreed to allow limited sampling from the area around the original mine entrance, well away from Sullivan's hidden tunnel. As Reed worked, Morgan observed him carefully, noting his methodical approach and genuine scientific interest. Unlike the EPA inspector or the BLM survey team, he seemed focused on the geology itself rather than searching for something specific. "The Silver Peak mine has a fascinating history," Reed commented as he labeled his final samples. William Silver Peak was actually quite innovative for his time. His extraction methods were remarkably efficient, given the technology available in the early 1900s. "You seem to know a lot about the original operation," Morgan noted. "Historical mining techniques are something of a specialty of mine," Reed explained. "I've been researching this Silver Peak operation specifically because it represents an interesting case study in small-scale family-operated mines that maintain profitability through multiple generations, unusual in an industry dominated by boom and bust cycles." His knowledge of the property's history seemed authentic rather than a pretext for other interests. By the time he departed, Morgan was cautiously optimistic that Dr. Reed might represent a genuine academic resource rather than another threat to Sullivan's legacy. Later that evening, as Emma and Jason played cards by the light of the newly installed solar-powered lamps, Morgan received a call from Catherine Winters with disturbing news. Vertex Resources has filed a formal challenge to your mineral rights claim, the attorney reported. They're alleging that Sullivan's original acquisition of the property involved fraudulent misrepresentation of its intended use, potentially invalidating subsequent transfers, including your recent purchase. Can they do that? Morgan asked, stepping outside to keep the conversation private. They can try, Winters replied. It's a desperate legal maneuver with minimal chance of success given Sullivan's documentation, but it's revealing in terms of strategy. They're attempting to force a legal battle that would drain your resources and potentially pressure you into selling rather than facing protracted litigation. So they're trying to outspend me rather than outargue me. Precisely. They have deep pockets in a legal department specifically experienced in mining rights disputes. But we have Sullivan's documentation and the trust structure he created, which anticipated exactly these kinds of challenges. After ending the call, Morgan sat on the cabin's front step watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Vertex's legal challenge confirmed what she had suspected. From the beginning, they knew about the secondary vein and were determined to gain control of it by any means necessary. The escalating pressure made the master map Emma had discovered even more significant. If Sullivan had indeed identified multiple valuable deposits throughout the region, Vertex's aggressive pursuit of the Silver Peak claim might be just one part of a larger strategy to control mineral resources across the entire area. As Morgan contemplated these implications, Emma emerged from the cabin and sat beside her, leaning comfortably against her mother's shoulder. "Mom," she said after a moment of companionable silence, "I think I figured out another part of Mr. Sullivan's puzzle." "What do you mean?" "The map we found with all the star markers, I think the symbols are like a code. Each one represents something specific about what's at that location." Morgan looked at her daughter with renewed amazement. "How did you figure that out?" Emma shrugged as if the connection were obvious. "The pickaxe symbol is on our mine, and we know it has gold. The location marked with what looks like a water droplet is right where Pine Haven's main spring is located, and I saw it on a local map in the general store. And the one with the crystal symbol is near where Dr. Reed mentioned finding unusual quartz formations." The observation demonstrated a level of pattern recognition that Morgan found remarkable. If Emma was right, Sullivan's master map might be more than just locations. It could be a comprehensive resource survey of the entire region, identifying various valuable deposits beyond just the gold in the Silver Peak mine. "You have an amazing mind, Emma," Morgan said, hugging her daughter close. "Sullivan would have been impressed." "Do you think he knew someone like me would find his map someday?" Emma asked, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "I think he hoped someone would," Morgan replied. "Someone smart enough to understand what he had discovered and brave enough to protect it." As they sat together under the vast canopy of stars, Morgan felt a growing certainty that Sullivan's legacy extended far beyond the gold deposit beneath their cabin. Through his meticulous planning and foresight, he had created not just a hidden treasure, but an inheritance of purpose, a mission to preserve and properly develop resources that others would exploit or misuse. And somehow, across 7 decades, that inheritance had found its way to a struggling single mother and her remarkably perceptive daughter, 2 people who had come to the Silver Peak cabin seeking merely shelter, but had discovered a legacy that would transform their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with autumn colors beginning to paint the surrounding forest in vivid golds and reds. Morgan stood on the cabin porch, coffee mug in hand, watching Emma explore the creek that ran along the eastern edge of their property. Her daughter had adapted to mountain life with remarkable ease, developing routines that included morning nature walks, afternoon study sessions with the homeschooling materials Morgan had arranged, and evenings spent poring over Sullivan's maps and journals. Jason emerged from the cabin, his own coffee steaming in the cool morning air. "The satellite internet should be working by this afternoon," he reported. "The technician is scheduled to arrive at 11. Once that's set up, Emma can attend her virtual classes without having to drive into town for a connection." "Thank you for arranging that," Morgan said gratefully, "and for everything else. I know you've put your own projects on hold to help us." Jason shrugged. "What's family for? Besides, this is the most interesting job I've had in years. How many contractors get to renovate a historic cabin while helping protect a secret gold mine?" Their comfortable moment was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching multiple engines, by the sound of it too many for the satellite internet technician who wasn't due for several hours. Jason tensed immediately. "Are you expecting anyone?" "No," Morgan replied, setting down her coffee and moving toward the cabin door. "Get Emma inside." As Jason hurried toward the creek to retrieve his niece, Morgan watched three vehicles emerge from the tree-lined access road, a black SUV with government plates, a Vertex Resources Range Rover similar to Holt's, and a third vehicle she didn't recognize, an expensive-looking sedan with tinted windows. The convoy parked in the clearing beside the cabin, and several people emerged. From the government SUV came a man in a dark suit displaying credentials that identified him as Agent Thomas Reynolds with the Department of Interior Division of Resource Protection. Alexander Holt stepped from the Vertex vehicle, his expression a mixture of confidence and irritation. From the sedan emerged Catherine Winters, whose presence sent a jolt of confusion through Morgan. "Ms. Hayes," Reynolds began without preamble, "I'm here to serve notice of a federal assessment of the Silver Peak mining claim under provisions of the Historic Mining Sites Safety Act. This property has been identified as presenting potential public safety hazards requiring immediate evaluation." Jason returned with Emma positioning himself protectively between the visitors and his family. "What specific hazards are you assessing, Agent Reynolds?" he asked. "We've already initiated structural reinforcement and environmental remediation as part of the restoration project." Reynolds barely glanced at Jason, focusing instead on Morgan. "Our concerns relate to subsurface instabilities and potential groundwater contamination from unmapped mining excavations. The assessment requires comprehensive access to all structures and potential mine entrances on the property." The wording was too specific to be coincidental. Unmapped mining excavations suggested knowledge of Sullivan's secondary tunnel, while comprehensive access would include the hidden entrance Morgan had worked so hard to secure. More concerning was Winter's presence alongside Holt and the federal agent, suggesting a connection Morgan hadn't anticipated. The attorney she had trusted with Sullivan's secrets was somehow involved with the very people trying to seize control of the property. Morgan maintained outward calm while her mind raced through options. Refusing federal agents could escalate the situation dangerously, but allowing unrestricted access would reveal Sullivan's carefully preserved secret and potentially expose her to claims against her mineral rights. "We're happy to cooperate with safety assessments," she replied carefully. "However, I'll need to see the specific authorization documents and consult with my attorney about the scope of access being requested. I'm sure you understand the need for proper legal oversight when federal agencies request access to private property." Reynolds frowned clearly, having expected either immediate compliance or emotional resistance rather than measured legal caution. "The authorization documents are included with the notice," he said, handing her an official-looking folder. "However, this assessment is classified as an emergency safety inspection, which doesn't require owner consent under Section 12 of the Mining Safety Regulations." Morgan accepted the folder but made no move to open it. "My understanding is that emergency provisions apply only when immediate public safety threats have been identified. Since this property is private with no public access and over 5 miles from the nearest residence, I'm unclear what emergency conditions would justify immediate uninspected access." The question was reasonable but provocative, challenging Reynolds to provide specific safety concerns that would justify the emergency classification. His hesitation suggested the classification was indeed a procedural manipulation rather than a response to legitimate safety issues. "The specific concerns are detailed in the technical assessment attached to the notice," he finally responded. "However, I should note that obstruction of a federally safety inspection can result in significant penalties, including potential property seizure under public safety provisions." The threat was explicit but legally questionable, as both Morgan and Reynolds seemed to recognize. Pushing the confrontation further might force him to either retreat or escalate to actions that would be difficult to legally justify later. Before either could speak again, Jason's phone rang. A prearranged signal from the security system he had installed indicated that someone was accessing the property from another direction, potentially using the official inspection as a distraction for unauthorized exploration of the hidden tunnel. "Ms. Hayes," Jason said calmly, using the formal address to maintain a professional appearance before the federal agent. "The delivery we were expecting has arrived at the lower access point. Would you like me to handle it while you speak with Agent Reynolds?" The coded message confirmed Morgan's suspicions. The frontal approach by Reynolds was coordinated with another team attempting to access the property through the forest behind the cabin, likely seeking Hammond's hidden tunnel entrance. "Yes, please do," she responded, matching his calm tone. "Ensure everything is properly documented for our permits." As Jason headed toward the cabin, ostensibly to access the lower property, but actually to monitor the security system and respond to the potential intrusion, Morgan turned back to Reynolds with renewed confidence. "Agent Reynolds, I'll review these documents immediately and consult with my attorney about appropriate next steps. In the meantime, I must insist that all federal personnel remain in the main clearing area until proper legal protocols are established for this inspection." Reynolds appeared ready to object, but Morgan continued with quiet authority that reflected her growing determination to protect Sullivan's legacy and her family's future. "I understand the importance of safety assessments for historic properties. I'm not refusing inspection, merely ensuring it proceeds according to proper legal standards." She glanced meaningfully at Catherine Winters. "Though it appears my current legal representation may have conflicts of interest that need to be addressed." Winters had the grace to look uncomfortable, avoiding Morgan's direct gaze. Her presence alongside Holt suggested a betrayal that explained how Vertex and federal agencies had obtained such specific information about the property. As Reynolds hesitated, Emma approached her mother, her young face serious but unafraid. "Mom, do they want to see the hidden tunnel?" she asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The one with Mr. Sullivan's gold mine?" The blunt question from a child created a moment of stunned silence. Morgan suppressed a smile at her daughter's tactical brilliance. By openly acknowledging what everyone was dancing around, Emma had effectively changed the dynamic of the confrontation. "Yes, sweetheart, I believe that's what they're looking for," Morgan replied, placing a protective arm around Emma's shoulders, though they're being rather indirect about it. Holt recovered first, stepping forward with a practiced smile. "Ms. Hayes, perhaps we could speak privately about a mutually beneficial resolution to this situation. Vertex Resources is prepared to make an extremely generous offer for the property, one that would secure your family's financial future while avoiding potentially costly legal complications." "I'm sure you would prefer a private conversation, Mr. Holt," Morgan replied evenly. "But I think transparency is important when dealing with matters of public record and private property rights. If you have an offer to make, you can present it formally through appropriate legal channels, ones that don't involve surprise visits with federal agents and compromised attorneys." Reynolds, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation had taken, intervened. "Ms. Hayes, this inspection is required regardless of any private business matters between you and Vertex Resources. The safety concerns are detailed in your documentation, which I'll review thoroughly," Morgan finished for him. "And if legitimate safety issues exist, I'll cooperate fully with properly conducted inspections. But I won't be pressured into allowing unrestricted access to my property based on vague claims of emergency conditions." The standoff might have continued, but Jason returned from the cabin with news that shifted the dynamics yet again. "I've just received a call from Samuel Parker's office," he announced, naming a prominent mining rights attorney whose reputation in Colorado legal circles was legendary. "He's agreed to represent Ms. Hayes effective immediately and requests that all communication regarding the Silver Peak property be directed to him rather than Ms. Winters." Catherine Winters visibly paled. Samuel Parker was known for his aggressive defense of property owners against both corporate and government overreach, and for his thorough investigation of ethical violations by opposing counsel. "Furthermore," Jason continued, "our security system has just recorded individuals attempting to access the property from the western boundary, individuals without identification or authorization. Mr. Parker has advised that we should file immediate trespassing charges and request a formal investigation into coordinated attempts to illegally access private property under color of authority." The implied threat was clear. If Reynolds and Holt persisted, they risked exposure of what appeared to be a coordinated operation involving potential legal and ethical violations. After a tense moment, Reynolds nodded curtly. "We'll reschedule the inspection once the authorization documentation has been properly reviewed by your new counsel. Please have Mr. Parker contact my office directly." As the visitors returned to their vehicles, Morgan noticed Catherine Winters lingering behind. Once the others were out of earshot, the attorney approached cautiously. "Morgan, I can explain," she began. "Save it for the ethics committee." Morgan cut her off. Was it Vertex from the beginning, or did they approach you after I hired you? Winters saw her professional facade crumbling. After. They have files on the Silver Peak property going back decades, geological surveys suggesting massive deposits beyond what anyone has officially documented. When you came to me with Sullivan's documentation they offered, well, it doesn't matter what they offered. I made a mistake. A mistake. Morgan's voice was quiet but intense. You betrayed a client's confidence and potentially endangered my family. That's not a mistake, Catherine. That's a choice, one with consequences. Without waiting for a response, Morgan turned and walked back to the cabin where Emma and Jason were awaiting. Together they watched as the convoy of vehicles departed, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a profound sense that the conflict over Sullivan's legacy had entered a new and more dangerous phase. Once they were alone again, Jason activated the cabin's enhanced security systems, including motion sensors that would alert them to any approach from any direction. How did you know to mention Samuel Parker? Morgan asked as they settled in the cabin's main room. Jason grinned. I didn't. I made the call based on a listing I found in your research notes. Potential legal resources. Parker's name was at the top with a star next to it. I figured we needed to shake them up, and dropping a prominent name seemed like the quickest way. We should probably contact him for real now, Morgan said. We need legitimate legal representation, especially after discovering Catherine's betrayal. Emma, who had been unusually quiet since the confrontation, spoke up. Why did your lawyer lady help the bad guys, Mom? I thought lawyers were supposed to protect their clients. Morgan sat beside her daughter, choosing her words carefully. Most lawyers do protect their clients, Emma, but sometimes people make choices based on what they want rather than what's right. Miss Winters chose money and influence over her professional responsibility. Like Sullivan's enemies tried to take his discovery instead of finding their own, Emma observed with the clarity of a child cutting through adult complexities. Exactly like that, Morgan agreed, which is why Sullivan went to such lengths to protect what he had found and to make sure it eventually went to someone who would value it properly. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Jason reinforced the cabin's security measures while Morgan made contact with Samuel Parker's office, securing an appointment for the following day. Emma, seemingly unfazed by the morning's confrontation, returned to her study of Sullivan's master map, adding notes to her growing analysis of the pattern of symbols. That evening, as Morgan reviewed the emergency inspection documentation Reynolds had provided, she discovered something disturbing buried in the technical appendices. The geological survey data included readings from ground-penetrating radar that clearly showed the tunnel system beneath the cabin, not just vague anomalies but detailed imaging that maps Sullivan's hidden workings with remarkable precision. They know exactly where the secondary vein is located, she told Jason, showing him the survey results. These scans were taken from adjacent properties using equipment sophisticated enough to map the entire tunnel system without ever setting foot on our land. Jason studied the images with concern. This explains their confidence in the coordinated approach. They're not fishing for information, they know precisely what they're after. Which makes them even more dangerous, Morgan concluded. They have technical knowledge of the deposit but lack legal access. That's a volatile combination. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed and Jason had retired to his room, Morgan sat at the kitchen table reviewing Sullivan's master map by the light of a single lamp. The pattern of marked locations formed a rough circle centered on a mountain peak about 10 miles from the Silver Peak cabin, a formation locally known as Guardian Peak. Each marked location included coordinates, a symbol, and what appeared to be a yield estimate in Sullivan's precise handwriting. The Silver Peak location showed the highest projected yield for gold, but other sites showed potentially significant deposits of different resources. Silver, copper, rare earth elements, and several markings Morgan couldn't immediately identify. If Sullivan had indeed discovered multiple valuable deposits throughout the region, the implications were staggering. Vertex's aggressive pursuit of the Silver Peak claim might be just one element of a larger strategy to control mineral resources across the entire area, resources that Sullivan had mapped, but deliberately left undeveloped. As Morgan contemplated these possibilities, a soft knock at the cabin door startled her. Checking the security monitor Jason had installed, she was surprised to see Dr. Ethan Reed standing on the porch alone and without a vehicle visible nearby. Cautiously, Morgan opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. Dr. Reed, it's nearly midnight. I apologize for the late hour, Reed said, his expression serious. But after what happened this morning, I thought you should know there's more to the Silver Peak property than just the gold deposit Sullivan discovered. Much more. Morgan studied him carefully, searching for signs of deception. How do you know about Sullivan's discovery? Because I've been studying his work for years, Reed replied. Not just the mining operations, but his comprehensive regional resource survey, what he called the custodian's map. The reference to a map Morgan had only discovered days earlier sent a chill through her. Either Reed was part of the forces trying to seize control of Sullivan's legacy, or he possessed knowledge that might prove invaluable in protecting it. After a moment's hesitation, Morgan removed the security chain and opened the door. I think you'd better come in, Dr. Reed. We have a lot to discuss. As Reed stepped into the cabin, Morgan noticed a small symbol pinned to the collar of his jacket, a miner's pick crossed with what appeared to be a surveyor's tool, forming a pattern identical to the one she had seen carved into the rock in Sullivan's old photograph. The discovery sent a surge of questions through her mind. Who was Ethan Reed really? What did he know about Sullivan's work? And most importantly, was he an ally in protecting Sullivan's legacy, or yet another threat to the inheritance that had so unexpectedly fallen into Morgan's hands? The answer to these questions would determine not just the future of the Silver Peak claim, but potentially the fate of an entire network of resources that Sullivan had mapped 7 decades earlier, resources that were now at the center of a struggle Morgan was only beginning to understand. Before we continue, Morgan said as Reed settled into a chair at the kitchen table, I need you to explain exactly who you are and how you know about Sullivan's work. Reed nodded, seeming to appreciate her directness. That's fair. He removed the small pin from his collar and placed it on the table between them. This symbol represents an organization called the Custodians, a group Walter Sullivan helped establish in the 1950s. We are scientists, engineers, and conservationists dedicated to responsible stewardship of mineral resources. So you're not actually with the U.S. Geological Survey? Morgan's hand moved closer to her phone, ready to call Jason if necessary. I am with the USGS, that part is true, Reed clarified. The custodians operate within legitimate institutions maintaining professional credentials that allow us to monitor resource developments legally. We don't hide from authorities. We work within the system to protect what Sullivan identified. Morgan studied the pin more closely, the crossed tools forming a simple but distinctive emblem. I've seen this symbol before in an old photograph of Sullivan at this cabin. He was the founding member, Reed explained. After discovering the network of deposits throughout this region, Sullivan realized the potential for exploitation was enormous. Rather than claiming everything for himself or revealing the full extent of his discoveries, he created both legal frameworks to protect individual sites and an organization to maintain oversight across generations. The explanation aligned with what Morgan had pieced together from Sullivan's documentation, but skepticism remained. If you're part of Sullivan's organization, why are you only approaching me now? And how do I know you're not working with Vertex or the government agencies trying to seize this property? Reed's expression hardened. The custodians have been watching the Silver Peak property for decades, ensuring Sullivan's legal protections remained intact. When the property finally transferred to you through the tax auction exactly as Sullivan's trust intended, we continued monitoring from a distance, assessing whether you would recognize and appreciate what you'd found. You've been watching us, Morgan's unease deepened. Observing, Reed corrected, not interfering. Sullivan designed his system to identify a worthy successor based on specific qualities: resourcefulness, determination, integrity. The custodians respect that process. We don't choose who receives the legacy. We simply provide support once they've proven themselves worthy of it. And you think I've proven myself worthy? Morgan asked, skepticism evident in her tone. Reed smiled slightly. You resisted Vertex's offers despite financial pressure. You secured legal protection for the property. You recognized the significance of Sullivan's work beyond its monetary value. And most importantly, you've shown determination to protect it rather than exploit it. So yes, by Sullivan's criteria, you've demonstrated worthiness. Morgan considered his words carefully. If Reed was being truthful, the custodians represented potential allies in her increasingly challenging situation. If he was lying, engaging with him could expose Sullivan's secrets to yet another threat. What about today's confrontation, she asked. Where were the custodians when federal agents and Vertex representatives were trying to force access to the property? Monitoring and documenting, Reed replied. We have recordings of the entire encounter, including evidence of coordination between supposedly independent entities. That documentation has already been secured and could prove valuable if legal challenges escalate. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Morgan, the situation is deteriorating rapidly. Vertex has obtained geological survey data confirming the extent of Sullivan's discovery. Their aggressive approach today suggests they're prepared to use both legal pressure and questionable tactics to gain control of not just the Silver Peak claim, but potentially other sites Sullivan identified. The master map, Morgan said quietly. They're after all of it, aren't they? Reed's eyes widened slightly. You found it, the comprehensive resource survey. My daughter found it, actually. Hidden in a compartment in Sullivan's underground chamber. Reed sat back, appearing genuinely impressed. That's remarkable. The custodians have copies of Sullivan's regional surveys, but the master map with his original annotations was thought lost decades ago. Your daughter must be quite exceptional to have located it. She is, Morgan agreed, a mother's pride evident in her voice. She spotted patterns in Sullivan's markings that I'd completely missed. After a moment's consideration, Morgan made a decision. She retrieved Sullivan's master map from its hiding place and carefully unrolled it on the table. This is what you're talking about, isn't it? Sullivan's survey of the entire region. Reed studied the map with what appeared to be genuine reverence, his fingers hovering above the surface without touching it. This is Sullivan's original work, his personal annotations and yield estimates for each site. The copies we've been working from lack this level of detail. He pointed to the symbols Emma had identified. Each marker represents not just a location, but a specific type of resource and extraction approach. The pickaxe for the Silver Peak gold deposit indicates traditional mining methods. The water droplet near Pine Haven marks a rare mineral spring with unique properties. The crystal symbol identifies a site with gem-quality mineral formations. And these yield estimates, Morgan asked, are they accurate by modern standards? Remarkably so, Reed confirmed. Sullivan's geological assessments were decades ahead of his time. Using techniques that weren't widely adopted until the 1970s, he identified deposits that modern surveys are only now beginning to locate. The conversation continued late into the night, with Reed explaining the broader context of Sullivan's work and the current threats to his legacy. According to Reed, Vertex Resources was just one of several entities that had been tracking Sullivan's discoveries over the decades. Recent advances in geological survey technology had enabled them to confirm deposits that were previously only theoretical, accelerating interest in the entire region. The confrontation at your property today wasn't just about the gold deposit, Reed explained. It was a first move in what will likely become a coordinated effort to control multiple sites identified on Sullivan's map. The gold is valuable, certainly, but some of the other deposits represent resources with strategic significance beyond their monetary worth. What kind of strategic significance? Morgan asked. Rare earth elements essential for advanced technology, mineral formations with unique properties, water sources with unusual chemical compositions. Sullivan didn't just find gold, Morgan. He mapped resources that have become increasingly critical in the modern world, resources that certain interests would go to extraordinary lengths to control. The implications were both exciting and terrifying. Sullivan's legacy extended far beyond the hidden gold mine beneath the cabin, encompassing a network of valuable sites throughout the region. The responsibility of protecting that legacy suddenly seemed overwhelming. What exactly are you offering? Morgan finally asked, as the first hints of dawn appeared through the cabin windows. Partnership, Reed replied simply. The custodians don't seek ownership or control. We provide protection, expertise, and a network of professionals committed to Sullivan's vision of responsible stewardship. In return, we ask only that resources be developed ethically, with appropriate environmental safeguards and fair distribution of benefits. Oh, that sounds almost too idealistic to be true, Morgan observed. Reed smiled. Sullivan was an idealist at heart, a practical one who understood that protecting valuable resources required both legal frameworks and dedicated individuals willing to take a long view. The custodians embody that practical idealism. Before Morgan could respond, Jason appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness at the sight of Reed. Everything okay here? He asked, positioning himself protectively between Reed and the hallway that led to Emma's bedroom. It's fine, Morgan assured him. Dr. Reed has been explaining some important context about Sullivan and his work. I think you should hear this too. Over coffee, Reed repeated the key points for Jason's benefit, including the existence of the custodians and the broader significance of Sullivan's Regional Resource Survey. Jason listened skeptically at first, but grew increasingly engaged as Reed provided details that aligned with what they had already discovered. So what's the immediate plan? Jason asked when Reed finished. Vertex and their government allies aren't going to simply back off because you've revealed yourselves. No, they won't, Reed agreed. In fact, their efforts will likely intensify now that they realize others are aware of what's at stake. Our first priority should be securing the tunnel access to the secondary vein. The entrance from the original mine. There's another entrance, Morgan interrupted, alarmed at the implication. Reed nodded grimly. According to our records, Sullivan created two access points to the secondary vein, the hidden tunnel from the cabin, and a concealed connection from the deepest part of the original Silver Peak mine. The second entrance was deliberately obscured, but could potentially be discovered by anyone conducting a thorough exploration of the old workings, which is exactly what Vertex would do if they gained access to the property, Jason concluded. We need to secure that second entrance immediately. Planning consumed the rest of the morning, with Reed providing detailed information about the original mine's layout and the likely location of the concealed access point. By the time Emma joined them for breakfast, they had developed a strategy to explore and secure the connection between the original mine and Sullivan's secondary workings. Emma, far from being intimidated by Reed's presence or the complex situation, immediately engaged with the technical aspects of the plan. Her questions revealed an intuitive understanding of Sullivan's methods that continued to impress both Morgan and Reed. You think like him, Reed observed as Emma pointed out a pattern in the tunnel maps that the adults had overlooked. Sullivan had that same ability to see connections and hidden patterns. Emma beamed at the comparison. His maps are like puzzles where all the pieces connect in multiple ways. Once you understand how he thinks, the patterns become obvious. By mid-morning, they were prepared to explore the original mine entrance, a task that required proper safety equipment and expertise that Reed fortunately possessed. With Jason remaining at the cabin to monitor security and coordinate with Samuel Parker's office, Morgan and Reed set out for the visible mine entrance, approximately a quarter-mile from the cabin, with Emma insisting on accompanying them despite Morgan's initial reluctance. She might spot things we'd miss, Reed pointed out quietly, and she's already demonstrated an unusual affinity for Sullivan's methods. The original mine entrance was partially collapsed, as Morgan had observed during her initial exploration of the property. What had once been a properly timbered shaft was now a crumbling opening barely large enough for an adult to enter carefully. Reed conducted a thorough safety assessment before allowing anyone to proceed, securing loose timbers and testing air quality with portable equipment. The main shaft appears stable enough for cautious exploration, he finally announced, but we'll need to move slowly and remain alert for any signs of structural weakness. Equipped with hard hats, powerful flashlights, and basic safety gear from Reed's USGS vehicle, they entered the original Silver Peak mine, with Morgan leading, Reed following, and Emma between them. The main tunnel extended roughly 200 yards into the mountain before branching into several smaller passages that followed various mineral veins. According to Sullivan's notes, the connection to the secondary vein should be located in the deepest part of the eastern branch, Reed explained, consulting a map he had brought. It was deliberately disguised to appear as a collapsed section rather than a functional passage. They followed the eastern branch, descending gradually deeper into the mountain. The air grew cooler and damper, while the timber supports showed increasing signs of age and deterioration. Reed frequently paused to check structural stability and air quality, ensuring their exploration remained safe. After navigating several hundred feet of increasingly narrow tunnel, they reached what appeared to be a dead end, a rock fall that blocked further progress. This matches Sullivan's description, Reed said, examining the fallen rocks carefully. But according to his notes, it's not a genuine collapse, but a deliberate construction designed to conceal the connection to the secondary workings. Emma approached the rock fall, studying it with the same intense focus she had applied to Sullivan's maps. After a moment, she pointed to a particular configuration of stones near the bottom of the pile. "Look at these," she said excitedly. "They're arranged too neatly to be random. And see this pattern? It's the same as the symbol on Dr. Reed's pin, the cross tools." Reed knelt beside her, shining at his light where she indicated. Sure enough, several stones had been deliberately positioned to form a subtle representation of the custodian's emblem, visible only to someone specifically looking for it. Remarkable, Reed murmured. Sullivan created a marker that would be recognizable only to those who knew what to look for. Your daughter has an extraordinary eye for detail, Morgan. Working carefully, they began removing stones from the area Emma had identified, revealing not a solid rock fall, but a cleverly disguised passage. The opening was narrow but navigable, leading to a short tunnel that connected with a larger chamber beyond unmistakably part of Sullivan's secondary workings. "We've found it," Morgan said, feeling a surge of excitement as they emerged into the chamber she recognized from her exploration of the tunnel system from the cabin. "This is part of the secondary veins Sullivan documented." Reed nodded, examining the chamber with professional interest. "And now we understand how the two systems connect. Anyone who discovered this passage could potentially access the entire secondary working and eventually the hidden entrance beneath your cabin. So we need to secure this connection," Morgan concluded. "Make it genuinely impassable rather than just disguised." "Exactly. But first, let's complete our exploration to ensure we understand the full extent of the—" Reed's sentence was cut short by a distant rumbling sound that rapidly grew in intensity. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, and dust began to filter down from the tunnel ceiling. "Back to the entrance," Reed ordered Price sharply, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Now." They retreated quickly, with Reed guiding Emma and Morgan, pushing them ahead of her. As they navigated the narrow passages back toward the mine entrance, the rumbling intensified and the timber supports began to creak ominously. Just as they reached the main shaft, a more violent tremor shook the tunnel, dislodging a support beam that crashed down mere feet behind them. The collapse continued in a chain reaction, sealing the eastern branch they had just exited, while sending dangerous vibrations throughout the remaining structure. "Keep moving," Reed shouted above the noise, practically carrying Emma as they scrambled toward daylight. They emerged from the mine entrance in a cloud of dust, collapsing onto the ground at a safe distance as the rumbling gradually subsided. Behind them, the mine entrance partially collapsed, leaving only a small opening where there had been a navigable passage. "Is everyone all right?" Morgan asked, frantically checking Emma for injuries. "I'm okay, Mom," Emma assured her, though her face was pale beneath a layer of rock dust. Reed was already on his satellite phone, his expression grim as he reported the incident and requested immediate assistance. When he finished the call, he turned to Morgan with anger evident in his usually calm demeanor. "That was no natural occurrence," he stated flatly. "The timing and location are too precise. Someone triggered that collapse deliberately, someone who knew we were inside the mine." "But who would—" Morgan began, then stopped as realization dawned. "They were watching us, Vertex or the government team. They saw us enter the mine and tried to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, the implication too horrific to verbalize in front of Emma. Reed nodded grimly. "The stakes have escalated beyond legal maneuvers and property disputes. They're now willing to endanger lives to achieve their objectives." Within an hour, the area around the mine entrance was crowded with emergency vehicles. Local sheriff's deputies, a mine rescue team Reed had summoned through his USGS connections, and even a news crew from the nearest large town alerted by the emergency radio traffic. Jason arrived moments after the first responders, having been notified by the cabin security system when the emergency vehicles approached. His relief at finding his family safe quickly transformed into cold anger when Reed explained the deliberate nature of the collapse. "This crosses every line," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "They endangered a child. Whatever Vertex or these government agencies want, nothing justifies that." As the mine rescue team assessed the damage and secured the area, Sheriff Martinez, a no-nonsense woman with 20 years of local law enforcement experience, took statements from Morgan, Reed, and Emma. "You're certain the collapse was deliberately triggered?" she asked, her expression serious as she made notes. "Absolutely," Reed confirmed. "I've investigated dozens of mine collapses during my career. Natural structural failures don't propagate in the pattern we experienced. This was initiated by explosives or similar means precisely targeted to block our exit path." Martinez nodded grimly. "We'll conduct a thorough investigation. In the meantime, I'm posting deputies at both access roads to your property, Ms. Hayes. If someone is willing to risk causing a fatal mine collapse, there's no telling what else they might attempt." As the sheriff departed to coordinate with her deputies, Reed guided Morgan and Jason slightly away from the gathered emergency personnel, his voice low and urgent. There's something else you need to know. When we reached Sullivan's secondary chamber before the collapse, I noticed fresh tool marks on one of the rock faces, evidence of recent sampling. Someone's already been in there, Jason asked, alarmed. Reed nodded. Recently, and they extracted samples from one of the richest sections of the vein. But here's what's truly significant. They also took samples from the adjacent rock formation, not just the gold-bearing quartz. Why would that matter? Morgan asked. Because Sullivan's notes indicate that the adjacent formation contains traces of rare earth elements, specifically high concentrations of indium. It's a critical component in touchscreen solar panels and various defense applications. 30 times more valuable by weight than gold and subject to severe supply constraints globally. The revelation cast the entire situation in a new light. If Sullivan's discovery included not just gold but strategically valuable rare earth elements, it would explain the intense interest from both private companies and government agencies and the increasingly desperate measures they were willing to employ. So this isn't just about the gold, Morgan said, the pieces finally fitting together. It's about resources with national security implications. Precisely, Reed confirmed, which explains the coordination between Vertex and government agencies. They're not just after profit, they're pursuing resources deemed critical to technological and military applications. As emergency workers continued to secure the mine entrance and reporters gathered statement from officials, Morgan noticed a black Range Rover parked at the far edge of the access road, just close enough for its occupants to observe the activity. Though she couldn't see clearly through the tinted windows, she had little doubt that Alexander Holt was watching, assessing the results of what had nearly been a tragic outcome. The attempted trap had failed, but it had revealed the lengths to which their opponents were willing to go. Morgan's $400 cabin and Sullivan's hidden legacy had placed her family at the center of a conflict with implications far beyond mineral rights and property disputes, a conflict that now involved national interest, corporate power, and resources of strategic importance. As they returned to the cabin under sheriff's escort, Morgan realized that protecting Sullivan's legacy would require more than legal maneuvering and security measures. It would demand a comprehensive strategy that addressed the full scope of what Sullivan had discovered and the powerful interests now determined to control it. The hidden chamber beneath the cabin had yielded not just gold, but a revelation about the true value of Sullivan's discovery, a value that made their situation both more dangerous and more significant than she had ever imagined. The morning after the mine collapse, Morgan sat at the kitchen table with Samuel Parker, the mining rights attorney Jason had fortuitously mentioned during the confrontation with Reynolds and Holt. Parker turned out to be exactly as advertised, a formidable legal mind with extensive experience defending property owners against both corporate and government overreach. So let me make sure I understand the situation completely, Parker said, reviewing his notes. You purchased this property at a tax auction for $400, subsequently discovered a hidden gold deposit that the original owner, Walter Sullivan, had concealed in the 1950s, found documentation establishing your clear title to both the property and mineral rights, and are now facing coordinated pressure from Vertex Resources and multiple government agencies, culminating in what appears to be a deliberate attempt to cause a mine collapse while you, your daughter, and Dr. Reed were inside. That's a succinct summary, Morgan agreed. Parker nodded, his expression grave beneath silver hair. In 40 years of practice, I've seen many disputes over valuable mineral claims, but few involving this level of aggressive action or coordination between private and government entities. What are our options? Jason asked from his position by the window, where he had been monitoring the property's perimeter since dawn. Legally, your position is strong, Parker replied. Sullivan's documentation provides clear chain of title, and his trust structure was specifically designed to withstand challenges. The more immediate concern is security, protecting both your legal rights and your physical safety while we develop a comprehensive strategy. Reed, who had joined the meeting at Morgan's invitation, spoke up from his seat near the fireplace. The custodians can provide additional security resources, people with relevant expertise who can supplement the sheriff's patrols without drawing undue attention. Parker regarded Reed with measured interest. I've heard rumors about the custodians, for decades dismissed them as mining folklore until now. Sullivan's foresight continues to impress. His vision extended beyond mere wealth accumulation, Reed explained. He saw these resources as a legacy to be protected and developed responsibly across generations. Their strategic discussion was interrupted by Emma's excited voice from the small study area Jason had set up for her homeschooling. "Mom, I found something in Sullivan's journal, something really important." Morgan joined her daughter, who was surrounded by Sullivan's documents and her own extensive notes. Emma pointed to a series of pages in Sullivan's personal journal, not the technical notebooks documenting the mind, but a smaller volume containing more personal reflections. "Look at these entries from April 1954, Emma said. "Sullivan wrote them just before he faked his death. They're in a different handwriting than the rest of the journal, much messier and harder to read." Morgan examined the pages, noting the distinct change in penmanship from Sullivan's normally precise script to a more hurried, almost frantic hand. The content was equally unusual, a series of apparently random numbers and letters organized in groups of 5. "It's a code," Emma explained with the confidence of someone who had solved a particularly challenging puzzle. "He wrote it this way so only the right person would understand its significance." Parker and Reed had joined them, studying the coded entries with professional interest. "A substitution cipher, perhaps," Parker suggested. "Not my area of expertise, but I've seen similar codes in historical mining documents, ways to record valuable information while maintaining secrecy." Emma shook her head. "It's not a traditional cipher. Look at how the groups are organized, 5 characters in each group, but with specific patterns of numbers and letters. This isn't encrypted text, it's coordinates." Reed's expression shifted from curiosity to admiration. "GPS coordinates. Those weren't in common use in the 1950s. "Not GPS, Emma replied, "something older. Remember how Sullivan marked locations on his master map? He used a different system. A surveyor's grid reference combined with elevation markers. These coded entries followed the same pattern." Morgan watched with growing amazement as her daughter demonstrated the correlation between Sullivan's coded journal entries and the marking system used on his master map. "Each 5-character group represents a specific location," Emma explained. "The first 2 characters indicate position on the regional grid Sullivan established. The next 2 show depth or elevation. The final character is a resource identifier, G for gold, S for silver, I for indium, and so on." "So this isn't just a record of locations," Morgan realized. "It's a comprehensive catalog of everything Sullivan discovered, far more detailed than even the master map." Emma nodded eagerly. "Exactly, and look at this final entry." She pointed to a longer sequence at the end of the coded section. "This doesn't follow the same pattern as the others. I think it's a key to something else, maybe another hidden cache of information." Before anyone could respond to Emma's remarkable discovery, the cabin's security system chimed, indicating someone approaching the main entrance. Jason checked the monitor and frowned. "It's a woman I don't recognize. Older, well-dressed, alone." Morgan joined him at the monitor, studying the visitor, a composed woman in her 70s with silver hair, elegantly styled, wearing clothes that suggested both taste and means. She stood patiently at the cabin door, carrying nothing more threatening than a leather portfolio. "I'll speak with her," Morgan decided after a moment's consideration. "But let's be cautious." Jason positioned himself strategically as Morgan opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. "Can I help you?" Morgan asked politely but warily. The woman offered a dignified smile. "Ms. Hayes, my name is Eleanor Sullivan. I believe you found something that belonged to my father, Walter Sullivan." The claim was so unexpected that Morgan momentarily lost her composure. "Your father Sullivan had a daughter." "Indeed he did," the woman replied. "May I come in? I believe we have much to discuss regarding my father's legacy and your recent discoveries." After a brief consultation with Parker and Reed, Morgan admitted Eleanor Sullivan to the cabin. The woman's composed demeanor remained unchanged as she noted the gathered group, though her eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of Reed's custodian pin. "I see my father's organization remains active," she observed, taking the seat offered to her at the kitchen table. That would have pleased him greatly. "Before we continue," Parker interjected professionally, "I'd appreciate some verification of your identity and relationship to Walter Sullivan." Eleanor nodded as if she had expected this request. From her portfolio, she removed several documents: a birth certificate showing her as the daughter of Walter and Elizabeth Sullivan, photographs of her as a child with her parents at various locations, including the Silver Peak cabin and legal documents establishing her as an heir to the Sullivan estate. I was 7 years old when my father orchestrated his disappearance, she explained, as they examined her documentation. My mother and I were part of his plan, relocated to California under assumed names while the world believed Walter Sullivan had died in a hiking accident. If you've known about the Silver Peak property all this time, why are you only appearing now? Morgan asked, still suspicious, despite the convincing documentation. Eleanor's expression softened. My father's plan was elaborate and multi-generational. The property was to remain in trust until the proper successor was identified, someone with the qualities he valued. My role was not to claim the property, but to serve as keeper of certain knowledge that would only be relevant once that successor emerged. She turned to Emma with unexpected warmth. And it seems the successor has not only emerged, but has already begun deciphering my father's codes. You must be quite remarkable, young lady. Emma blushed under the attention, but maintained her composure. I just understand how he thought. His patterns make sense to me, as they did to me at your age. Eleanor smiled. My father had a particular way of seeing connections that few others recognized, a gift he apparently passed to both of us in different ways. The conversation that followed revealed dimensions of Sullivan's story that had been absent from his technical and legal documentation. Eleanor described a man driven not just by geological expertise, but by profound ethical concerns about resource development and exploitation concerns that had led him to conceal valuable discoveries rather than allow them to be misused. The gold deposit beneath this cabin was significant, Eleanor explained, but it was merely one element of a comprehensive resource survey my father conducted throughout the region. What truly concerned him were the rare earth elements and strategic minerals he discovered, resources that would become increasingly critical in the decades following his work. Like the indium deposits adjacent to the gold vein, Reed suggested. Eleanor nodded. Precisely. My father anticipated technological developments that would make such elements vital to both commercial applications and national security. He feared that unregulated extraction would lead to environmental destruction and exploitation of local communities. So he hid everything, Morgan concluded, and created elaborate mechanisms to ensure the resources would eventually be developed responsibly. And selected you, Ms. Hayes, Eleanor added, through criteria he established decades before you were born. The trust was programmed to identify someone with specific qualities: resilience, integrity, resourcefulness, and a demonstrated commitment to ethical principles, even under significant pressure. Morgan felt a strange mixture of honor and unease at this confirmation of her role in Sullivan's multi-generational plan. But why me specifically? What made the trust activate when I needed affordable housing? The timing wasn't coincidental, Eleanor explained. The trust monitored various factors: market conditions, technological developments, political climate, and potential successors with the right combination of qualities. When those factors aligned, it triggered the tax auction process, creating an opportunity that someone like you would recognize and pursue. The explanation aligned with what Catherine Winters had suggested, but hearing it from Sullivan's daughter made the elaborate mechanism seem both more remarkable and more plausible. So what happens now? Jason asked, voicing the practical question at the heart of their situation. If Sullivan intended Morgan to be his successor, what role do you play in this, Miss Sullivan? Eleanor turned to her portfolio once more, removing a sealed envelope that appeared as pristine as if it had been prepared yesterday rather than decades earlier. My father left this in my keeping with instructions to deliver it only to the person who successfully discovered and began to decipher his legacy. She handed the envelope to Morgan. It contains information he considered too sensitive to leave in any fixed location, information about the full scope of his discoveries and his vision for their development. Morgan accepted the envelope with a sense of ceremony, noting her name written on the front in what she now recognized as Sullivan's precise handwriting. He wrote this for me decades before I was born. Not for you specifically, Eleanor clarified, but for whoever proved worthy of becoming his successor. He created dozens of such letters over the years, revising them as circumstances changed, entrusting the final version to me shortly before his staged death. As Morgan carefully opened the envelope, Emma suddenly spoke up, her voice filled with excitement. I solved it, the final code sequence in the journal, and I figured out what it means. All eyes turned to the young girl who held up Sullivan's journal with triumphant satisfaction. It's not coordinates like the others, she explained. It's an access code for something he called the archive, a comprehensive collection of all his research and discoveries, and it says where to find it. Eleanor's composed demeanor showed its first crack, genuine surprise. The archive. My father mentioned it in his final instructions to me, but never revealed its location. He said only his true successor would be able to locate it. Emma pointed to her decoding mark. It's here at Guardian Peak, in a sealed chamber accessible only with specific coordinates and a physical key. She looked up at Morgan with wide eyes. Mom Sullivan hid his most important discoveries inside the mountain, at the center of his resource survey, the place all the other locations revolve around. The revelation created a moment of stunned silence broken by Reed's thoughtful voice. Guardian Peak has been the focus of intensive geological surveys by both Vertex Resources and government agencies over the past 5 years. They've been searching for something without knowing exactly what it is or where to find it. And now we do, Morgan said quietly, looking down at Sullivan's letter in her hands. The letter confirmed what Emma had discovered, providing additional context and guidance. Sullivan had indeed created a secure repository within Guardian Peak, a chamber containing comprehensive documentation of all his discoveries throughout the region, along with his vision for their responsible development over generations. The archive represents my life's work beyond the gold that likely first attracted your attention, Sullivan wrote. It contains surveys, analyses, and development plans for resources that will become increasingly vital in the decades ahead. More importantly, it outlines an approach to resource development that balances economic benefit with environmental preservation and community welfare, an approach I called the Custodian's Code. As Morgan read portions of the letter aloud, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. That was his true legacy, she said softly. Not the gold or even the rare earth elements, but a vision for how such resources could serve humanity without destroying the natural world that contains them. The letter concluded with specific instructions for accessing the archive, including coordinates that matched Emma's decoding work and mention of a physical key required to open the sealed chamber. The golden key enclosed with my original letter will complete your access to the archive, Sullivan wrote, referring to the small key Morgan had found with his first letter in the mine. So we have both the coordinates and the key, Jason summarized. What's our next move, Parker, who had been listening thoughtfully throughout, offered his professional assessment. Legally, Sullivan's documentation establishes Ms. Hayes as the rightful heir to his discoveries, including whatever this archive contains. Ms. Sullivan's appearance and confirmation of the succession plan strengthens that position considerably. He turned to Eleanor with respectful curiosity. Do you intend to challenge Ms. Hayes's claim to your father's legacy? Eleanor shook her head firmly. Not at all. My role has always been as custodian of knowledge, not claimant to property. My father's plan was for his successor to lead the development of his discoveries with support from both the custodians and his family as appropriate. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted subtly from tension to cautious alliance. Eleanor's appearance had initially seemed potentially threatening another complication in an already complex situation. Instead, she represented an unexpected source of knowledge and support, a living connection to Sullivan's original vision. What about Vertex and the government agencies? Morgan asked, returning to the immediate threat. The mine collapse attempt shows they're willing to take extreme measures. If they learn about the archive before we can secure it, Reed nodded grimly, they'll stop at nothing to access it first. Guardian Peak has been the focus of their attention for years, though they apparently lack the precise locations Sullivan concealed within it. Then we need to move quickly, Morgan decided, before they realize what we've discovered. Planning consumed the rest of the day, with each person contributing their particular expertise. Parker developed legal strategies to protect their claim to whatever the archive might contain. Reed coordinated with custodian members to arrange security and logistical support. Jason assessed equipment needs for safely accessing a mountain location that had remained sealed for decades. Eleanor provided invaluable historical context, filling gaps in their understanding of Sullivan's methods and motivations. Her relationship with her father had continued secretly after his staged death, giving her insights that weren't contained in his written documentation. He was extraordinarily methodical, she explained, as they reviewed maps of Guardian Peak. Every aspect of his plan included redundancies and safeguards. The archive will be exactly where he indicated, preserved exactly as he left it, accessible only through the specific method he designed. Emma remained focused on Sullivan's coded journal, continuing to extract information that others had overlooked. Her natural affinity for Sullivan's thinking patterns proved increasingly valuable as they prepared for the expedition to Guardian Peak. "There's something else here," she announced late in the afternoon, studying a sequence she had initially dismissed as repetitive notation. Instructions for accessing the archive safely. Sullivan wrote that the entrance includes what he called verification measures to ensure only authorized individuals can enter. "Security systems," Jason asked. "In the 1950s. Not electronic," Emma clarified. "Mechanical challenges, puzzles that require understanding of his methods and values. He designed the entrance to admit only those who think as he did." The revelation added another layer to their preparation requirements. Not only would they need to locate the entrance using Sullivan's coordinates, but they would also need to navigate whatever verification challenges he had incorporated into its design. As evening approached, Morgan took a moment alone on the cabin porch, watching the sunset paint Guardian Peak in golden light on the horizon. The mountain that had been merely a scenic feature days earlier now represented the culmination of Sullivan's legacy and perhaps the most significant challenge she had yet faced as his chosen successor. Eleanor joined her, the older woman's presence surprisingly comforting despite their brief acquaintance. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" Eleanor observed quietly, "to realize you're part of something conceived decades before your birth, something with implications beyond personal gain or individual achievement." Morgan nodded. "When I bought this cabin, I was just looking for affordable housing, a place to rebuild my life after financial setbacks. I never imagined becoming the custodian of a multi-generational legacy." "Yet you've embraced that responsibility," Eleanor noted. "You've protected my father's discoveries, resisted considerable pressure to surrender control, and prioritized responsible development over quick profit. You've proven yourself worthy of his trust, even without knowing the full scope of what that entails." The simple validation from Sullivan's daughter carried unexpected weight. Throughout the escalating challenges of the past weeks, Morgan had sometimes questioned whether she was equal to the responsibility Sullivan had placed upon her. Eleanor's assessment suggested that her doubts were unfounded, that she had indeed demonstrated the qualities Sullivan sought in his successor. "What if I fail?" Morgan asked softly. "What if Vertex or these government agencies get to the archive before we can secure it?" Eleanor considered the question with the wisdom of someone who had lived with similar concerns for decades. "My father anticipated setbacks and opposition. The archive is merely one element of his legacy, important certainly, but not the entirety of his vision. Even if others access it first, the network of resources he identified remains, as does the custodian organization he established, and now you, his chosen successor." She placed a gentle hand on Morgan's arm. "The true legacy isn't gold or rare earth elements, or even the archive itself. It's the commitment to responsible stewardship, a commitment you've already demonstrated through your actions. Whatever happens tomorrow, that legacy continues through you, and I suspect through your remarkable daughter as well." As darkness settled over the mountains, Morgan felt a sense of clarity emerging from the complex situation. Sullivan had indeed chosen her across decades and through mechanisms she was only beginning to understand. That choice carried responsibilities she hadn't sought, but now embraced fully, not just for herself and Emma, but for the broader vision Sullivan had entrusted to her care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they ventured to Guardian Peak in search of the archive. Vertex and their government allies would undoubtedly continue their efforts to seize control of Sullivan's discoveries. The path ahead remained dangerous and uncertain. But for the first time since discovering the hidden tunnel beneath her $400 cabin, Morgan felt truly equal to the challenge. With Emma's remarkable insights, Jason's practical support, Reed's custodian resources, Parker's legal expertise, and now Eleanor's historical knowledge, she had assembled exactly the team needed to fulfill Sullivan's vision. The inheritance he had preserved for 70 years had found not just an individual successor, but a community of complementary skills and shared values, precisely the outcome Sullivan himself might have hoped for when he first concealed his discoveries decades earlier. As stars appeared above Guardian Peak's distant silhouette, Morgan silently accepted the mantle Sullivan had prepared for her. Whatever the archive contained, whatever challenges lay ahead in protecting and developing his discoveries, she would face them with the same determination and integrity that had brought her this far. The forgotten inheritance was forgotten no longer, and its true value extended far beyond gold or rare minerals to encompass a vision of responsible stewardship that could benefit generations to come. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains as Morgan, Emma, Jason, Reed, and Eleanor prepared for their expedition to Guardian Peak. They had spent much of the night finalizing preparations, gathering necessary equipment, and reviewing Sullivan's instructions for accessing the archive. Sheriff Martinez has deputies watching both access roads to your property, Parker reported during a final briefing. The attorney would remain at the cabin coordinating legal protection and communications while the others ventured to Guardian Peak. She's also arranged for periodic air patrols over the peak, ostensibly as part of routine wilderness monitoring. What about Vertex and their government allies? Jason asked, checking the secure communications equipment Reed had provided. They've been unusually quiet since the mine collapse, Parker replied. No official inquiries, no visible surveillance that we've detected. It's concerning suggests they might be planning something significant. Reed nodded grimly. The custodians have observed increased activity at Vertex's regional headquarters. Multiple vehicles departing before dawn, specialized equipment being loaded. They're mobilizing for something. A race to Guardian Peak, Morgan concluded. They must have obtained information about the archive, perhaps from Catherine Winters, or through their own research into Sullivan's work. Then we need to move quickly, Eleanor urged. If they lack the precise coordinates and access codes Emma decoded, we still have an advantage, but perhaps not for long. The journey to Guardian Peak involved a combination of driving and hiking. The initial approach used Forest Service roads that brought them within 2 miles of their destination, after which they would proceed on foot through increasingly rugged terrain. Reed had arranged for custodian members to secure their route positioning lookouts at strategic locations to warn of any Vertex's approach. As they loaded equipment into Reed's USGS vehicle and Jason's truck, Emma approached Morgan with Sullivan's journal clutched to her chest, her expression uncharacteristically anxious. Mom, what if I made a mistake with the codes? What if we get to Guardian Peak and can't find the archive? Morgan knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. Then we'll figure it out together. But Emma, you've shown an amazing ability to understand Sullivan's methods better than any of us. If anyone can decipher his instructions correctly, it's you. The girl's confidence returned, reinforced by her mother's trust. I think I found something else in the journal last night, a warning about the verification measures. Sullivan wrote that the final challenge requires the courage to sacrifice apparent wealth for true value. I'm not sure what that means, but it sounds important. Morgan made a mental note of this cryptic clue, adding it to the growing collection of insights Emma had extracted from Sullivan's writings. Throughout their preparation, her daughter had repeatedly demonstrated an almost uncanny connection to Sullivan's thinking, as if some intellectual kinship spanned the decades between them. The convoy departed as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, taking a circuitous route to avoid main roads where Vertex might have established monitoring. As they drove, Eleanor shared additional context about her father's work, filling gaps in their understanding of his motivations and methods. My father began as a conventional mining engineer, she explained, focused primarily on efficient extraction techniques. But during a government survey project in 1952, he discovered evidence of rare earth deposits with properties that fascinated him scientifically, but troubled him ethically. Because of their potential military applications, Reed asked. Eleanor nodded. Partly that, but also because of the environmental impact their extraction would cause using methods available at the time. He became convinced that certain resources should remain undeveloped until technology evolved to allow responsible extraction. So he hid everything, Jason concluded. Not just hid preserved and documented for future development under the right conditions, Eleanor clarified. The archive contains not just surveys of what exists, but detailed plans for how each resource should be developed, when and under what protective frameworks. The Forest Service road gradually deteriorated as they approached the wilderness area surrounding Guardian Peak. At a small clearing marked on Sullivan's maps, they parked the vehicles and prepared for the hiking portion of their journey. From here, we follow Sullivan's coordinates into more rugged terrain, Reed explained, distributing specialized hiking equipment. The archive entrance should be located on the eastern face of Guardian Peak, approximately 2/3 up the mountainside. According to these notes, Emma added, studying the decoded instructions, there's a specific approach path that avoids natural hazards and provides optimal access to the entrance. Sullivan marked it with his symbol at key points, the cross tools of the custodians. The hike proved challenging but not technically difficult. Sullivan had indeed selected a route that balanced accessibility with sufficient isolation to discourage casual discovery. At several junctions, they located small markers carved into rocks or trees, the custodian emblem weathered by decades of exposure but still discernible to those specifically looking for it. After nearly 2 hours of steady climbing, Reed's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message. Custodian lookouts report multiple vehicles on the main access road to Guardian Peak, he reported grimly. Vertex personnel, accompanied by individuals matching the description of Agent Reynolds and his team. They're approximately 1 hour behind us, but taking a more direct route. Can they reach the same location? Morgan asked. Reed consulted his topographical maps. Their approach requires technical climbing equipment for the final ascent to the elevation we're targeting. That will slow them, but not stop them. We have perhaps a 2-hour advantage at most. The group increased their pace, with Jason helping Eleanor navigate the steeper sections, while Emma moved with the natural agility of youth. Morgan found herself impressed by the older woman's stamina. At 70-plus years, Eleanor maintained a steady pace that belied her age. My father insisted I learn mountaineering skills as a child, Eleanor explained, noticing Morgan's observation. He believed understanding the physical landscape was essential to appreciating the resources within it. I've maintained those skills throughout my life, though it's been some years since I've tested them so thoroughly. As they approached the coordinates Emma had decoded from Sullivan's journal, the terrain became increasingly rocky, with the eastern face of Guardian Peak rising dramatically before them. The specified location appeared to be a sheer rock wall with no obvious entrance or opening. This is definitely the right place, Emma insisted, checking Sullivan's coordinates against Reed's GPS unit. The entrance should be right here, but Morgan studied the rock face carefully, recalling Sullivan's methodical nature and fondness for concealment. He wouldn't make it obvious. Just like the hidden door in the cabin, the entrance would be disguised to be invisible, except to someone who knows exactly what to look for. Emma approached the rock wall, running her hands along its surface with the same intuitive focus she had demonstrated when discovering the hidden compartment in Sullivan's underground chamber. After several minutes of careful examination, she paused at a section that appeared identical to the surrounding stone. Here, she said confidently, feel this part, it's different. Not natural rock, but something manufactured to match the surrounding formation. Reed joined her, his experienced hands confirming her assessment. Remarkable. It's some kind of composite material, would appear identical to natural stone in geological surveys, but with different structural properties. Following Emma's guidance, they located a subtle indentation in the disguised section, not visible to the eye but detectable by touch. When pressed in a specific pattern that Emma derived from Sullivan's coded instructions, a seam appeared in the seemingly solid rock face, revealing the outline of a door approximately 4 feet high. The key, Morgan said, retrieving Sullivan's golden key from its secure pouch. Emma, since you found the entrance, would you like to do the honors? The girl accepted the key with solemn appreciation for the moment's significance. A small, nearly invisible keyhole became apparent as she examined the door's surface. The key fit perfectly, turning with a surprisingly smooth mechanism for something unused for decades. The door swung inward silently, revealing a narrow passage illuminated by an unexpected source. Glass prisms set into the ceiling that captured and redirected natural sunlight from some unseen opening above. The ingenious lighting system created a softly glowing pathway that extended deeper into the mountain. Sullivan designed this to function without electricity or batteries that would deteriorate over time, Reed observed admiringly. The prism system would provide illumination during daylight hours, regardless of weather conditions or season. The passage extended approximately 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber that elicited gasps of amazement from everyone. Like the entrance tunnel, it was illuminated by Sullivan's prism system, the natural light revealing a space that resembled a combination of scientific laboratory, library, and vault. Metal shelving lined the walls, filled with carefully preserved documents, geological samples, and technical equipment. A large stone table occupied the center of the chamber, its surface covered with maps similar to Sullivan's master survey, but with far greater detail and annotation. Climate control had been achieved through a passive ventilation system that maintained constant temperature and humidity regardless of external conditions. The archive. Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. My father's complete legacy preserved exactly as he left it. As they moved further into the chamber, Emma pointed to an inscription carved into the stone wall above what appeared to be the main workspace. Not wealth alone, but wisdom in its use. Not power alone, but stewardship of earth. Not knowledge alone, but vision for what may be. The Custodian's Code. Sullivan's core philosophy, Reed explained, the principles that guided both his concealment of these resources and his vision for their eventual development. The group spread out, each drawn to different aspects of the archive, according to their interests and expertise. Jason examined the structural engineering of the chamber itself, impressed by Sullivan's ability to create a space that had remained secure and environmentally stable for 7 decades. Reed focused on the geological samples and survey equipment, recognizing techniques that had been decades ahead of their time. Eleanor moved to a section that appeared to contain personal items, photographs, journals, and artifacts connecting to the human side of Sullivan's story. Her fingers traced the spines of journals similar to those they had found in the cabin, but more extensive and intimate. Emma gravitated immediately to what appeared to be Sullivan's central work area, a desk containing his most important documentation and analysis. With an intuition that continued to amaze the adults, she quickly identified the organizational system Sullivan had employed, locating key documents with unerring accuracy. Morgan found herself drawn to a large metal cabinet with a combination lock unlike the others in the chamber. Following Sullivan's consistent pattern, she applied the same access code Emma had decoded from his journal. The cabinet opened to reveal dozens of carefully organized folders, each containing comprehensive development plans for specific resources Sullivan had identified throughout the region. These aren't just surveys, Morgan realized as she examined the contents. They're complete blueprints for responsible development mining techniques that minimize environmental impact, processing methods that maximize efficiency while reducing waste, even distribution models that ensure benefits flow to local communities rather than just distant corporations. And the true purpose of the archive, Eleanor confirmed, joining her. Not just documenting what exists, but planning how it should be used for maximum benefit with minimum harm. As they continued exploring, the Reed satellite phone vibrated again. Vertex and the federal team have reached the base of the eastern face, he reported after checking the message. They're preparing climbing equipment for the ascent. We have perhaps 45 minutes before they reach this elevation. The news created a sense of urgency that focused their examination of the archive. Rather than attempting to remove its contents, a task that would be both physically challenging and potentially damaging to Sullivan's carefully preserved materials, they began documenting key information using the digital equipment they had brought. Jason established a secure uplink to transmit their findings directly to Parker's protected server, creating a digital backup of the archive's most critical contents. Emma, with her intuitive understanding of Sullivan's organization system, directed them to the most important documents for immediate preservation. As they worked, Morgan noticed something unusual about the chamber's far wall, a section that appeared slightly different from the surrounding stone, similar to the disguised entrance, but with distinct characteristics. There's something else here, she called to the others, another hidden component. Emma joined her, applying the same perceptive touch that had located the external entrance. It's a secondary chamber, she confirmed, but the access mechanism is different, more complex than the entrance door. Examining the wall more carefully, they discovered not a keyhole, but what appeared to be a small balance scale integrated into the stone surface, with a shallow basin on each side. Beside it was another of Sullivan's inscriptions. To gain what is most valuable, one must be willing to surrender what merely glitters. The verification measure Emma found in the journal, Morgan realized. The courage to sacrifice apparent wealth for true value. Reed studied the mechanism thoughtfully. A test of values rather than just knowledge. Sullivan designed this to admit only those who share his ethical perspective, not just those who crack his codes. The meaning became clear as they examined the scale more carefully. One basin was marked with a simple gold symbol, the other with what appeared to be Sullivan's representation of knowledge or wisdom, an open book. It's a choice, Eleanor explained, her understanding of her father's thinking providing crucial insight. The secondary chamber contains something of extraordinary value, but to access it, one must demonstrate a willingness to prioritize knowledge over material wealth. We need to place something valuable in the gold basin, Emma concluded, something that represents choosing knowledge over gold. Morgan reached for the leather pouch containing the gold nugget Sullivan had left with his original letter, the tangible proof of the Silver Peak deposit's value. This seems most appropriate. Sullivan left it as evidence of the gold's quality, but perhaps its true purpose was for this moment. She placed the substantial gold nugget in the basin marked with the gold symbol. The scale immediately responded, the gold basin descending under the nugget's weight, while the knowledge basin rose. Nothing's happening, Jason observed after a moment. The door isn't opening. Emma studied the mechanism again, her brow furrowed in concentration. I think we're misunderstanding the test. It's not about placing gold in the gold basin. It's about what we choose to value more highly. With sudden clarity, Morgan understood. She removed the gold nugget from its basin and instead placed it in the basin marked with the knowledge symbol. The action represented a literal weighting of gold against knowledge, and choosing to associate gold with the pursuit of knowledge rather than mere wealth. The scale balanced momentarily, then tilted in favor of the knowledge basin, now weighted with the gold nugget. A soft click echoed through the chamber, and the disguised section of wall swung inward, revealing a smaller room beyond. The secondary chamber contained a single item on a stone pedestal, what appeared to be a small device of unfamiliar design. Approximately the size of a paperback book, but constructed of materials that still appeared pristine despite the decades it featured no obvious controls or displays. "What is it?" Jason asked, voicing everyone's confusion. Eleanor approached the pedestal, slowly recognition dawning in her eyes. "My father mentioned this in his final instructions to me, though he never explained its function in detail. He called it the keystone, said it was perhaps his most important creation, something that would only be relevant when the right successor found the archive." Reed examined the device without touching it, his scientific training evident in his careful assessment. The materials aren't standard for the 1950s or even today. Some kind of composite that's resisted deterioration remarkably well. Emma, drawn to the device with the same intuition that had guided her throughout their journey, pointed to small markings along one edge. These match the resource symbols from Sullivan's master map, the ones that identify different minerals and elements. Morgan studied the device with growing understanding. It's not just a record or a tool, it's a key to Sullivan's entire resource network, the physical embodiment of his comprehensive survey. As Reed's satellite phone vibrated again with increased urgency, Vertex and the federal team were now less than 20 minutes from their location. They faced a critical decision. The contents of the archive were too extensive to document completely in the time remaining, and removing everything would be physically impossible. "We take the keystone," Morgan decided. "It seems to be the culmination of Sullivan's work, the element he designed specifically for his successor to find." With careful reverence, she lifted the device from its pedestal. It was surprisingly light given its apparent solidity and warm to the touch despite the chamber's cool temperature. As her fingers wrapped around it, the surface responded with a subtle illumination, markers corresponding to the resource symbols beginning to glow with soft light. "It's activating," Emma whispered, watching the device with fascination. "Responding to human contact after all these years." A decision point had been reached, remained to document more of the archive's contents at the risk of confrontation with Vertex and federal agents, or retreat with the keystone and the critical information already secured. Morgan chose the prudent path, prioritizing safety over completeness. "We've accomplished what we came for," she announced. "The most important documentation has been transmitted to Parker, and now we have the keystone. It's time to leave." Their exit strategy had been planned in advance, a different route down the mountain that would avoid direct contact with the ascending Vertex team. Carefully sealing both the secondary chamber and the main archive entrance, they departed with Sullivan's legacy secured both digitally and in the form of the keystone. The descent proved tense but ultimately successful. Reed's custodian contacts reported that Vertex and the federal team reached the coordinates of the archive approximately 30 minutes after Morgan's group had departed, but the disguised entrance, resealed with Sullivan's key, resisted their initial attempts at location and access. By nightfall, they had returned safely to the Silver Peak cabin, where Parker awaited with news of his own. During their absence, he had filed comprehensive legal documentation establishing Morgan's clear title to all resources identified in Sullivan's surveys based on the material they had transmitted from the archive. Vertex will challenge these filings, of course, Parker explained as they gathered in the cabin's main room, the keystone resting on the table between them. But Sullivan's documentation is remarkably thorough, and the trust structure he created has withstood similar challenges for decades. Our position is strong. What about the federal interest? Jason asked. They seem just as determined as Vertex to gain control of Sullivan's discoveries. That's where things get interesting, Parker replied with a slight smile. I've been in contact with higher-level officials at the Department of Interior above Agent Reynolds and his team. When presented with evidence of coordination between federal agents and private corporate interests, they became quite concerned about potential ethical violations and conflicts of interest. You leveraged the attempted mine collapse, Morgan realized. Parker nodded. Combined with documentation of questionable coordination between supposedly independent regulatory actions and Vertex's acquisition attempts, the resulting internal investigation has effectively sidelined Reynolds and his allies, at least temporarily. The news represented a significant tactical victory, though all recognized that the broader strategic challenges remained. Vertex Resources possessed substantial financial and political resources that they would undoubtedly continue to deploy in pursuit of Sullivan's discoveries. As the evening progressed, Emma focused her attention on the keystone, studying its markings and subtle responses to touch with the same intuitive understanding she had demonstrated throughout their journey. By midnight, she had developed preliminary theories about its function and purpose. I think it's a navigation system, she explained, demonstrating how different combinations of pressure on the resource symbols cause corresponding markings to illuminate. A physical interface to locate and access the sites Sullivan identified on his master map. But it's more than that. It seems to contain data about optimal development approaches for each resource. A literal key to Sullivan's vision, Eleanor observed, not just where resources are located, but how they should be responsibly developed. The following days brought both challenges and opportunities. As predicted, Vertex filed legal objections to Morgan's mineral rights claims, initiating what promised to be complex litigation. But with Parker's skilled representation and Sullivan's exhaustive documentation, their position remained strong. More significantly, Morgan began formulating a comprehensive development plan based on Sullivan's work, not just for the gold deposit beneath the Silver Peak cabin, but for selected resources throughout the region. Following Sullivan's ethical framework, she prioritized minimal environmental impact, sustainable extraction methods, and equitable distribution of benefits to local communities. The keystone proved invaluable in this planning process. As Emma continued exploring its functions, they discovered it contained detailed information about each resource site, geological characteristics, extraction challenges, processing requirements, and environmental considerations. Sullivan had effectively created a comprehensive development blueprint encoded in a form that only his chosen successor could fully utilize. 1 week after their expedition to Guardian Peak, Morgan called a meeting that included not just her immediate allies, but also key stakeholders from the surrounding communities. The mayor of Pine Haven, representatives from neighboring property owners, and leaders from the indigenous community whose ancestral lands encompassed much of the region. In the Pine Haven Community Center, Morgan presented a vision directly inspired by Sullivan's work, but adapted for contemporary realities, a phased development approach beginning with the Silver Peak gold deposit, but eventually encompassing selected resources throughout the region, all following strict environmental and ethical guidelines. Sullivan identified these resources 70 years ago, not for personal enrichment, but as a legacy for future generations, she explained to the assembled group. His vision wasn't about maximum extraction, but about optimal stewardship development that balances economic benefit with environmental preservation and community welfare. The proposal included substantial local employment opportunities, revenue sharing with affected communities, and establishment of a foundation to manage long-term benefits from resource development. It represented a stark contrast to Vertex's typical approach of extracting maximum value with minimal local investment. Community response was cautiously positive, particularly when Eleanor Sullivan, daughter of the region's most legendary mining figure, added her personal endorsement to Morgan's plan. The indigenous representatives, initially skeptical, expressed appreciation for the emphasis on environmental protection and sacred site preservation. As the meeting concluded, Alexander Holt appeared at the back of the community center, his presence unexpected, but not entirely surprising. He had listened to Morgan's presentation without comment, his expression unreadable behind his corporate polish. When the crowd dispersed, he approached Morgan, directly maintaining the professional demeanor that characterized their previous encounters. An impressive vision, Ms. Hayes, he acknowledged, ambitious, ethically sound, and likely to generate substantial community support, but also expensive to implement and challenging to execute without significant industry experience. Are you offering that experience, Mr. Holt? Morgan asked, sensing a shift in his approach. Vertex Resources is reassessing its position, he replied carefully. Our legal department believes protracted litigation over Sullivan's claims would be costly and uncertain. Our board is exploring whether partnership might prove more productive than opposition. The offer represented a significant tactical adjustment from attempted seizure to proposed collaboration. Morgan recognized both the opportunity and the potential trap it represented. Any partnership would require absolute commitment to Sullivan's ethical framework, she stated firmly. Environmental protection, community benefit, and responsible extraction aren't negotiable elements. Understood, Holt replied. I've been authorized to discuss preliminary terms if you are interested. Our technical resources, combined with Sullivan's surveys and your legal position, could create something quite remarkable. Morgan promised to consider the approach, though her private assessment remained cautious. Vertex's sudden willingness to partner likely reflected recognition of their weakened position rather than genuine ethical conversion. Any collaboration would require carefully structured agreements with substantial safeguards. That evening, as Morgan discussed Vertex's unexpected overture with her core team at the cabin, Emma made a discovery about the keystone that transformed their understanding of Sullivan's legacy. It's not just a key to the resources he identified, she explained excitedly. It's a communication system linking all the sites on his master map. When activated at specific locations, it can transmit and receive data through some kind of network Sullivan established throughout the region. Reed examined the keystone with renewed interest. A communication network established in the 1950s that remains functional today, that would be technologically extraordinary. Not electronic, Emma clarified. Something more fundamental based on geological properties of the sites themselves. Sullivan found a way to use natural characteristics of mineral deposits to create information pathways. The revelation suggested possibilities beyond anything they had previously considered, not just valuable resources, but a revolutionary approach to understanding and utilizing geological formations. If Emma's assessment was correct, Sullivan had discovered principles that remained beyond current scientific understanding, despite 7 decades of technological advancement. This changes everything, Morgan realized. It's not just about extracting gold or rare earth elements. Sullivan discovered something far more fundamental about the interconnection of geological systems, something that could transform our understanding of the planet itself. The weeks that followed brought rapid developments on multiple fronts. Parker negotiated preliminary terms with Vertex that acknowledged Morgan's controlling interest in the Sullivan discoveries while leveraging the company's technical resources and industry connections. The agreement included strict ethical guidelines, community benefit requirements, and environmental protection standards derived directly from Sullivan's documentation. Federal interest shifted from attempted seizure to proposed collaboration with higher-level officials, recognizing both the legal strength of Morgan's position and the potential national benefits of responsible development. A comprehensive agreement established frameworks for regulatory approval while respecting Sullivan's vision of resource stewardship. Most significantly, Morgan initiated the first phase of actual development, not at the Silver Peak gold deposit as most expected, but at a less prominent site Sullivan had marked on his master map with a unique symbol, representing natural systems integration. Under Emma's guidance, they positioned the keystone at this location, activating what appeared to be the central node of Sullivan's region-wide network. The response was subtle but unmistakable. Instruments detected energy patterns flowing through geological formations in precisely the pathways Sullivan had mapped decades earlier. Emma's interpretation of the keystone's functions proved accurate. Sullivan had indeed discovered principles of natural communication networks embedded in the Earth itself. 3 months after her desperate $400 purchase of an abandoned cabin, Morgan Hayes stood on the cabin's front porch, watching autumn colors paint the surrounding forest in brilliant hues. The renovation was now complete, the historic structure restored to its original charm while incorporating modern amenities and sustainable systems. Emma emerged from the cabin, her tablet computer displaying the latest data from their first development site. "The network is stabilizing," she reported excitedly, just like Sullivan predicted in his notes. Once activated, the system becomes self-sustaining through natural energy flows. Morgan smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm, recognizing in Emma the same innovative thinking and ethical commitment that had characterized Sullivan's work. The intellectual kinship between them transcended the decades, creating a continuation of Sullivan's legacy through a new generation. Jason joined them, having just returned from overseeing construction of the processing facility that would eventually handle ore from the Silver Peak deposit. "Environmental permits are approved," he reported. "Sullivan's extraction method passed every regulatory requirement with remarkable margins. We can begin limited operations next month if you're ready." The transformation of their circumstances sometimes seemed dreamlike in its scope and speed. From financial desperation to stewardship of a multi-generational legacy, from an abandoned cabin to the center of a visionary resource development initiative, the journey had been extraordinary by any measure. Yet Morgan recognized that they stood at merely the beginning of Sullivan's true vision. The Keystone and its network represented possibilities beyond current scientific understanding, approaches to resource utilization and environmental integration that could transform humanity's relationship with the natural world. As sunset painted Guardian Peak in golden light, Morgan reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had brought them to this moment. Sullivan's elaborate mechanisms had identified her as his successor across 7 decades, bringing his legacy to someone he could never have known, but whose values aligned with his own. "What happens next?" Emma asked, sensing her mother's contemplative mood. Morgan placed an arm around her daughter's shoulders, gazing toward the mountain that housed the archive and all it represented. "We honor Sullivan's vision by extending it," she replied. "Not just developing the resources he identified, but understanding the deeper principles he discovered, the interconnections between geological systems, the natural networks that link different sites, the potential for harmony between human needs and environmental preservation." The gold deposit beneath their cabin, once the focus of such intense conflict, now seemed almost secondary to the broader legacy Sullivan had entrusted to them. Its development would provide financial foundation for more significant work, exploring the natural communication network Sullivan had mapped, understanding the Keystone's full capabilities, and implementing the comprehensive resource stewardship plan he had envisioned. Eleanor Sullivan, who had become a regular visitor and valued advisor, joined them on the porch. At 70-plus years, she provided living connection to Sullivan himself while embracing the extensions of his vision Morgan and Emma were developing. "My father would be pleased," she observed, gazing out at the mountains now preserved from exploitative development through the framework Sullivan had established decades earlier. "Not just with the protection of what he discovered, but with how you're carrying his work forward, honoring its spirit while adapting to new realities." As darkness settled over the mountains and stars appeared above Guardian Peak, Morgan felt profound gratitude for the desperate gamble that had led her to this place. The abandoned cabin purchased with her last $400 had indeed provided shelter for her family, but in ways she could never have imagined. Sullivan's forgotten inheritance, preserved through decades of careful planning and ethical foresight, had found its intended home. Not merely in the physical property or mineral rights, but in the shared values and vision of those who now carried his legacy forward. The true inheritance wasn't gold or rare earth elements or even the archive itself. It was a commitment to responsible stewardship, a vision of harmony between human needs and natural systems that could guide development for generations to come. As Emma activated the Keystone one final time that evening, its soft illumination highlighting the resource symbols Sullivan had so carefully encoded, Morgan recognized the most profound aspect of his legacy. Beyond the material wealth or scientific discoveries, Sullivan had created something more enduring, a multi-generational commitment to ethical stewardship that would continue long after the gold had been extracted and the rare earth elements processed. That was the true value of Sullivan's forgotten inheritance, not what could be taken from the earth, but what could be preserved for the future. A legacy Morgan Hayes, once desperate enough to spend her last dollars on an abandoned cabin, would now protect and extend for generations to come.